Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to Rattlecast 219. Thanks so much for joining me. Today's guest, Prartho Sereno, is here. She'll be with us in about 5 minutes, but before we begin, I should say that Rattle's a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been in continuous publication since 1995 and are unaffiliated with any other organization. We just do all this because we love poetry, and I know you do too. So please click the like button and share, subscribe, leave reviews on iTunes especially. That's helped a lot with our rankings on iTunes. Really appreciate all those recent reviews. Whatever you can do to help spread poetry around the internet would be much appreciated. Now we have Poet Respond we like to start out with. The poet Devon Balwit couldn't be here tonight, but she has a wonderful sonnet and on the theme that we've had so much lately, of course, which is the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. This was inspired by a simile from a poem in Kyla Koki's Matthew 6:28 in Poetry Magazine, the newest issue. So she was inspired by that and sort of spun off on this. And she says it's for all those called to be first responders. So let's give this poem a listen. Again, this is Devon Balwit. I think it's her 13th time in Poet Respond. She's one of those wonderful people who sends a poem every week and pretty much has been for, 10, 12 years or however long we've been doing Poet Response. So it's really, we appreciate that. And she writes these wonderful slant rhyme sonnets all the time. So I just love this poem. Let's give it a listen. This is Devon Balwit once again with War Sonnet.
War Sonnet with a simile borrowed from Kyle Okoke's Matthew 6:28. Chest like a trapdoor and me a medic. Parachuting in, leaning over the body, shattered on the rubbled road, I listen to the heart ticking like unexploded ordnance, hoping to delay the surge that is death, to deny its nothingness purchase. Me a robber, with my pressure bandages, codeine and comfort, my 8-week training scarcely enough to differentiate me from the gawkers who lean in to get a better view of someone else's tragedy. What can I do other than crudely splint the broken bones, halt the pulse of blood until the surgeon can do her work? Only a stopgap. Still, I throw myself there, where the line of being and not being wavers.
And once again, that was Devon Balwit with War Sonnet with a simile borrowed from Kyla Koki's Matthew 6:28. Powerful poem from this Sunday's Poet Respond. Now, after we've heard that, we're going to take a quick break and go to our main guest, Prartho Sereno. So we will be right back with more poetry. Sit tight, and I will be right back. And we're back. Now, today's main guest is Prartho Sereno. She's made her home in a bamboo hut in India, a 150-year-old farmhouse in Maine, a spiritual community in Oregon, and for the past 23 years, a funky upstairs duplex north of the Golden Gate Bridge. Along with painting and poetry, Prartho has dabbled in such art forms as taxi driver, family therapist, phys ed instructor at Cornell University, house cleaner, single parent, head cook, amateur singer, songwriter, illustrator, and palm reading psychic at various Catskill resorts. So that's really fun. We'll talk about a lot of that. She's author of the award-winning collections Indian Rope Trick, which I read and really enjoyed. I recommend that book for sure. Elephant Raga and Call from Paris. And is author-illustrator of the IPPY-winning gift book, Causing a Stir, The Secret Lives and Loves of Kitchen Utensils. Prartho's other published works include a poetry chapbook, music CDs, a whole bunch of other things, the book of essays, Everyday Miracles, an A to Z guide to the simple wonders of life. Her most recent and beautiful book is right here, Starfall in the Temple, which was just released by Blue Light Press. She's She's also founder of the ongoing poetry series, The Poetic Pilgrimage, Poem Making as Spiritual Practice, now online. And here she is. I got to actually unmute. There you
I
go.
just did it.
Yeah, hey, Prartho, how you doing? It's great to see you.
I'm great. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction.
Yeah, I'm so happy to see you. You're one of those poets that you're sort of always, there's always a good poem there when your poems appear in our submission folder. I mean, there's just, with a lot of variety and a lot of interest, and it's really fun to hear, and it's fun to meet you tonight.
It's great, yeah, because you were one of my first publishers, actually, from many years back.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's always great to hear. I really love that. And last week, too. So it's always nice. It's one of my favorite things that we get to sort of springboard people into big careers, which is what you've definitely done with all these great books. Let's start out with one of the early poems from this new book, and that is Mirrored Palace.
Okay. Mirrored Palace. If we're honest, as we look in, dear reader, don't we come upon a certain sorrow that is ours to carry, a dark and sacred something we might call gravitas? And if we allow ourselves a sidewise glance, don't we sometimes catch a shy but insistent light that bends, one might even say bows, to that dark seed? Forgive me then as I wonder which came first, Einstein's thoughts about gravity warping space, or his bearing witness to his own sorrow as it bent the light. Which came first, the quiet depths as we humans have always sensed around us, or the matter scientists have finally brought to light, the incalculable darkness that holds it all? The human heart has its secret knowings, the brain its fondness for fashion and fad. There was a time when great thinkers saw fairies, kept leather-bound ledgers with drawings and dates. But the poles shifted, and we were turned from those iridescent ones toward functional gray. We're asked to refrain from the sidewise glance, to retrain our visions to timepiece, engine, and grid, to pull up our bootstraps and take to the tarmacs of reason. We put on corrective lenses. What we once called stars in their falling were recast as rogue bits of dust and ice. Real stars don't fall, they told us. They're held by an absence so dense there's no making heads or tails. But isn't the human brain the one that construes the paradigms and maps the stars? Isn't it the very one that circumnavigates the grocery? The very same that falls in love, makes the coffee, does the math? And whether we choose a turtle to ride us through the firmament or prefer it all to pop from a nanoscopic dot, whatever the unlikely tale, who can argue it's done with mirrors? For no matter how deep we dig, we come up facing ourselves.
Yeah, that is Mirrored Palace, again, from the new book, Starfall and the Temple by Prartho Sereno. And it's a great example of the way the poems in the book feel. It's a lot of there's a lot of science in the book, which kind of surprised me. And of course, I love science. And a lot of just interesting facts and things that spring off into contemplation. And that seems to be something that just comes up so much in the poem. It's sort of like, you can read for the poetry, or you can read for all the interesting things that you're writing about too. So how would you characterize, how did this book come together, and what was the theme you had around it, and how did the poems fit together in a collection?
Well, yeah, that's really interesting, because this poem was written I got an assignment from one of my fellow writers at a coffee shop when she was looking at my manuscript, and she said, "What is this book about, Prartho? You need to be more direct on this thing." She said, you need a few poems that actually speak directly to what you're trying to do. And this poem came out of that. So to me, this poem is kind of, my answer to Caitlin Fendler, my writing partner. And so there were a lot of poems already that were coming. Poetry is so interesting. I mean, how does it come? A question I was on tour. A lot of people ask, and it's a hard one to answer, except that I'll be walking a lot of times in nature, and I sometimes say they're all in my knees, I think, because somehow walking alone, something about the rhythm, I start to hear a voice. It's a different voice than all the chatter that goes on. And it is the contemplations that seem to be happening are all the input I get, listening to the news, reading scientific things, watching what's happening with the Webb telescope. I love science and the probing that's happening. And also, I think maybe a lot of scientists are feeling this too, that the right side of the brain has been a bit slighted. And, that the part that, well, people seeing fairies, that's been a question I've had for a long time, actually, because I've heard that it was very common that very educated people saw fairies for a long period, I think during the 1800s, and even kept notebooks and pictures. And I thought, well, what is that? Anyway, so what are we missing? That's part of the question. But it does also feel like each fact that I come upon, or at least the new theories, feels so much like what it's like to be inside a human being. There's something about the way we're looking at the outside that is so human. And so that is really a lot of what a lot of these poems are, sort of that personal exploration of that, who are we and how does all this connect to what the human consciousness is. So a lot of that, but then there's other things sort of sprinkled in, but they seem to relate. I felt I got the feeling that this particular collection, well, it's called In the Temple, and to me the temple is the vastness, is the temple. It's no little thing. You don't need a roof for a temple. You're better off without one, actually. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating too, because what you're describing is the reason why I'm interested in poetry myself. It's the probing is what you said, but it's the way of exploring. It's kind of like its own scientific field or something, but probing inside the sort of the symbolic understanding that we spontaneously generate from that right brain, like you said. We have that, which I always bring up, that interview with Dr. Ian McGilchrist about the bifurcated brain and the way the two hemispheres are sectioned off and have entirely different motivations and ways of seeing the world. And poetry is that holistic way of seeing outside of language, and then we find a way to put it into language. And I think that's maybe the common thread that, you're reading, which is so interesting and broad, turning into poems is a way of exploring sort of outside of the scientific method,
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And also, the fact that words are so weak in a certain way. I always think the blah, blah, blah. And yet somehow there is something that's been possible. Well, I mean, blah, 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 yes. But also one of my great fascinations forever, since I was a child, I think, is the mystery of language itself. The fact that I'm moving my mouth and air is coming up through here and doing something, and then a little bit here, and people get something on the other end. And I somehow, it's like these little boats are being sent out on the waters, that have feeling and ideas, and all through this language. It's quite amazing to me.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great way to put it. And I think what we're all doing, and the magic of that is what poetry really is. Your bio note that we read at the beginning is one of the more interesting ones we've had in a long time on the show, going from the hut in India, the old farmhouse, the spiritual community. There seems to be a kind of seeking there just in the bio too. Can you tell us a little bit about how and when poetry fit into that, that sort of spiritual journey that seems like you've been on, I would have to guess, for your whole life?
I would say that, when I was, I often say this, and it's kind of a strange thing, but one of the first poems that really spoke to me was The Wheelbarrow, by William Krause Williams. And the fact that it was so much depends upon, and who knows, I was probably in middle school or something, the red wheelbarrow with the rainwater and the chickens. And I was like, yes, somebody finally gets this, So I don't even, it's hard to, it's inexplicable, really. But there was some other dimension that could be spoken about. And so I think that's what did it. And when I realized that, I began writing. And I wrote, I mean, my very first writings actually were Nancy Drew inspired murder mysteries, actually, when I was really young. But then when I found poetry, that really became in large part what I like to write. Um, and so, yeah, it has been, and there were certain periods where I was just so busy, like as a single parent, or particularly when I was giving birth, when I gave birth and had children in Maine and lived in this farm. I didn't write a lot during that particular period, but then suddenly, actually, when I got divorced, really, it's interesting. It just broke open, and I just started. I was writing with a kid on my knee in the post office on a paper bag or something. It just, suddenly there it was again, and really, I don't think it ever left. I would say when my first years in India, because I was there many times, 6 months at a time for probably 4 years total, but over a 10 or 11 year period. But when I was there, I would hear, and they were smaller. Some of these smaller poems I have in this book reflect that. I was making haiku, and when I was more in a meditative space, but still these images would just come rushing through. And so, yeah. And the other thing I do say is, people ask about my writing practice, and I'm ashamed to admit I don't really have one. I walk in the woods. I try to listen. I'm writing on paper bags, like I said. So I sometimes feel like my work has been to give birth in the fields. It's just where it happens is, and somehow they keep coming. So.
And can you tell us more, because it is so fascinating? So that hut, the bamboo hut in India, and the old farmhouse in Maine. How did you go from the one to the other, to the spiritual community in Oregon? What was that journey like?
Well, it just was a happening. It was a saying yes. Let me put it that way. When I ended up in the farmhouse in Maine with now my ex-husband, who is now one of my best friends and has always continued to be one of my best friends. But this moment happened in our lives. It was a very intense time. Both of our sets of parents died within a year and a half. So we just suddenly were in the throes of mystery, is all I can say, really. For me, that's what it was. I was a psychotherapist at the time, working in a university counseling center in Ohio and doing marathon growth groups. And, I was definitely part of the New Age I knew, what was it called? Anyway, it was the wild stuff we were doing. We were doing bioenergetics and all night marathon groups and stuff like that. And I loved it, really. I loved it. But then when I was faced with all these deaths, something shifted in me, and I felt like psychology was just not deep enough, really. We were trying to deal with personality, which seemed like it was almost irrelevant. The things that personality has to do with getting by in the world or whatever, and there was other things. Really the thing was, I felt like the deaths, it wasn't the tragedy of it, really. It was more the profundity of it, the fact that we are here at all, and the fact that we believe, every single one of us. And I did start at that time working for hospice, a hospice organization in Maine. And well, of course, at that time, we have to get from Ohio to Maine, but basically, my ex-husband got a job as university professor in Maine, and we moved. And that was kind of where some of my deepest probing started happening. And it's interesting, I wasn't writing, like I said, at that point. I was meditating, running in the mornings in the dark, having babies, growing vegetables, I don't know, doing a lot of things like that. But then when he fell in love with another woman, and really I was falling in love with something different also, I have to say. And so at that point, we separated, and I went to India, and he had the kids for a time, for 6 months. And in India, I lived in a hut, and what to say? I explored some incredible depths. India was a wonderful part of my life. It's sort of in the air there, really.
Well, I love that. You already said, it came about by saying yes. And we talked a little bit about that Cavafy poem with, Jane Hirschfield,
Oh,
the
yeah.
great no and the great yes, and some people
Mm.
have the great no within them and some people have the great yes within them. And it seems like when you say yes to life, all these things happen. And when you say no, it's still the way you are, but things don't. And so
Mm.
it's fascinating to see, like, your life seems like an example of the great yes.
Mm.
Do you want to read another poem? Let's read Event
Mhm.
Horizons next.
Okay, good. Let's see. Yep. Here we go. Event Horizons. A man now, my grandson has moved in downstairs, where he wrestles with the angels of amazement and doubt. Our shadows bow to one another as he leaves to drive people to the airport or city jobs. I want to tell him things, but the guardians of pre-dawn won't let a whisper pass at this hour, and I'm asleep again before he comes home. I want to tell him things, but the words have gotten snagged in the brain's frayed cogs. The name, for example, for the lightness that can blow through a heart, lift it from the body, and sail it around the world. I want to tell him, too, how the unexpected has a thing for us, how she hides among the pots and pans in wait for our little lives to whistle by, and how nobody ever believes they are old. One day, you and your little old lady sweetheart will make jokes about your slipping disguises over scrambled eggs and toast.
Yeah, another great poem, Event Horizons, again from Starfall in the Temple, the newest book by Prartho Sereno. And you mentioned already that you were looking for something deeper than psychology. And I'm always wondering, because I don't have a lot of experience or know much about the actual, like, meditate, like the deep meditation that you do, with things like maybe psychedelics or chants or staying up late, the dancing things, all those kind of things that you can do to sort of get into different mental states. Those things versus poetry, do you find that it's a similar sort of space you enter when writing a poem? Is a poem sort of like a way to do the same thing, or is there like a qualitatively different aspect to it that's not as deep, maybe? Poetry is amazing because we have like an artifact to bring back with us from that space. But what is the thing, talking about that depth beyond psychology, what's the thing that got you the deepest, I guess, is my question.
Well, that's a really wonderful question, actually. And I don't know if I've thought of it really that way. Excuse me. Well, I guess there's a couple questions you asked. I mean, one is, what got me the deepest? Well, one of the deepest experiences I ever had was in a VW van in Ohio. This was actually, so it sparked things as well. And a friend of mine was talking about, I was talking about the bad state of the world. And my friend said, "Oh, don't worry, it's going to be beautiful," or said, "Come out all right." And I thought, "Oh, really?" And then, no, actually, what's weird is I said that. I said, "Don't worry," is she was complaining about the state of the world. That's how it went, because I said, "I think it's going to all work out." And she said, "Oh, you have the faith." And I thought, I don't have any faith. I'm an atheist at this point, an agnostic anyway. I have no faith. And she said, "Well, don't worry about it." She said, you can look for God without having any faith. But once you have the experience, that will all change. And somehow that statement gave it to me. And I suddenly was in this. So that was not dancing wildly, taking psychedelics. That was just suddenly this memory arose. I can only say it that way. It was deeply familiar. It was this deep, familiar space that felt, the closest I could say is love. It also felt, there were different aspects of it that I didn't understand, and I probably still don't, but I have now ideas, like a light kind of went up my spine, something opened. I felt, and the main thing though was this. How did I ever forget this? So I think that particular experience has kind of carried me. Now, the difference between, sometimes my meditations don't go deep at all. what I attempt when I attempt the meditation, if I sit, for example. I have done a lot of moving meditations, dancing, and chanting, singing, humming, and those do help me a lot. In fact, there's a particular meditation I really like, which it's called Latihan, and it's where you let your body just be still, and then you allow it to start to move on its own. And then you try as best you try as best you can not to try. You try to just allow something to come through you. And I've had some amazing moments with that. In terms of writing poetry, when I first started teaching this class called, writing poem making as spiritual practice, it was a theory. It was not a fact. It was like, is it really? Because I had my suspicions about words, and you can do your own affecting with words. It's propaganda in a certain way. It's the language of lies. So it was a question I always had: is this really a spiritual practice? But I would say in recent times, since this book in particular, as I've been sharing the poems in it, I feel like it is. I'm finally convinced it really is. And a big part of it is that it makes space. I'm even calling it, because of the book's title, temples. It makes space for every experience. So there's no experience that is not possible to make a temple of, is not possible to make space of. So there is a kind of transcendence that can happen as I'm writing a poem or even reading a poem. There's also a kind of redemption that we've been finding in the class I teach. Sometimes a poem will be about some horrible, unthinkable thing. I'm thinking of one that was written about a child that was killed by a policeman, something like that. But it was so, it had so much space and light and heart in it that we all felt a kind of redemption of the entire act in the poem itself. Somehow all of us had a healing in reading the poem. So, I guess that's where my probing is right now is, how deep can this go, working with poetry in this way?
Yeah, well, I really, resonate with a lot of things you said. One of the things I started to think of it as, the right brain versus left brain split is so important. And it feels to me like the left brain creates propaganda and the right brain creates art, which is, one, because the left brain is apprehensive, trying to grasp things and use them for its own purposes, whereas the right brain is trying to understand and have this sort of see the connections between things, hold complicated thoughts at the same time. And that's sort of the way that the world really is that we don't see because we're locked inside the sort of models that they're imposed by that left brain. They want to push out things that we already know rather than discover and add to the model things that we don't know we know yet. And so it seems to me like it's almost a war from the one side of your mind, your side of yourself, with the other to try to get to that space that we call meditative, but is really the deeper understanding of that more holistic way of seeing the world. And so, is poetry like a practice for you like that? Do you sit down? Does it feel like meditating when you're actually writing in the words?
Yeah, like I said, I don't really have a practice, so it's not like unfortunately, although I do write with my students and I have 2 classes a week, so I write every single week for half an hour. So I guess I have that. A lot of times when I'm really, I don't even know if I can call it composing. I often stop myself from calling it composing because it is kind of this following something. It's following more than it, and it's listening more than it's composing. And so, and it is exactly trying to, I'm very attracted to paradox because I feel like it's the closest we come to truth. And I think that has to do with what you're saying about the 2 sides of the brain. And one of my practices, strangely, is once in a while when I have way too many notebooks that I haven't, with beginnings of poems that I know have something good in them, I'll go to Mendocino and I'll stay in a little room in a hotel there. And I'll just pull all my books out and I'll just get in there and I'll start messing with them and listening to them and being surprised by them. And but the other thing I wanted to say when you talked about the war is that it's inside. that the experience that I described that was kind of at my deepest was this, remembering something. The first part of that was feeling like two sides they were kind of in my belly. A dark and a light came together and stopped fighting. And that was the first experience of that before everything kind of became light. Oh, wow. And I didn't really understand it. Like I said, it was just, I can remember like, oh, everything came together into a whole as opposed to fighting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Let's hear another poem. I want to make sure we get enough. It's just fascinating discussion, though. So I want to make sure we don't steer too far away from the poetry.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking that myself, but we're there. Yeah.
I think Particles and Waves is next.
Okay, great. Okay, so these are these little, they're a little bit like the pebbles that Jane Hirschfield does in a way. Particles and Waves. Not one straight limb in the bentwood rocker, my favorite seat. Beetle in that phosphorescent cloak, have you been visiting the northern lights? Lemon trees, first year, one sweet fruit with Saturday's fish, one more to go. They beg me to come down when I hover at the ceiling in dreams where I remembered how to fly. I'm going to skip down, I think. When I ask my grandson how he plans to pay for the heap of ephemera he's piled into my cart, he's quick with the math. He has 2 wiggly teeth.
That's just wonderful. I love those Particles and Waves. And another sign of the hint to science that keeps coming up. And there's a way that, that we have astronomy as sort of a telescope looking out in the world into deep space. And poetry is a sort of a telescope looking inside the soul or something. And that's what we're doing with poetry. So very interesting that the astrology keeps coming up too. I wanted to ask you about the palm reading. Because I have like the longest lifeline. It like goes all the way around. Oh. So every time I hear anybody talk about palm reading, I'm like, I hope it's real because I want to live like a super long time. So how did you become a palm reader? And does that have anything to do with what we've been talking about and in poetry too?
Well, it is a form of poetry. I've always felt it was a form of poetry. And it is interesting. Probably I've done other kinds of psychic readings, but of all the kinds that I've done, I would say the palm, it does have a little more rooted in science, actually. For example, there is a line that doctors use, they're taught in medical school to look for if if they think Down syndrome, if the baby has Down syndrome. And it's called the simian line, and it's because in a gorilla or other primate's hand, there is just a straight line across the top. And that's where and the reason is, I mean, I don't know how far you want me to go into the science, but a simian will move their fingers together. We have differentiated finger use. And so because of that, when these 2 fingers come down, that's the heart line. When these 2 fingers come down, that's the headline. And the thumb creates the lifeline. Oh, so, wow. So the simian line is actually when there's a straight line across. Mine has a little bit of that, but not quite. But I've seen, because I've done a lot of palm reading, actually. I made my living that way for a while. So when the line goes all the way across, it does kind of mean, that the head and the heart work together. I think of it that way in terms, because I worked with Down syndrome at a time when I was a psychologist. I had different jobs where I worked with people with Down syndrome. And they their heart is their head. So, I mean, it's interesting. And also, the hand, I think there's a third of the cerebral cortex is devoted to the hand. And so one's thoughts about doing somehow are manifest in the hand. And so, yeah. And I mean, the lifeline, Mine has gotten longer. It had a break in it and it's kind of sealed up. And I think that's kind of interesting.
That is really
Because
interesting
it does
too.
change. Your hands do
Oh,
change.
that's really interesting too. So when does that develop? Is it how early in the womb, I
In the
imagine?
womb,
Yeah.
yeah. When as soon as the thumb comes out, which is about 3 months, and it starts moving around, then the first half of the lifeline shows,
Mhm.
and then the second half of the lifeline shows a little bit later. And then the fingers aren't even there yet. You know, they sort of slowly emerge, and then but the palm is obviously, all the lines are in there when the baby's born.
Yeah, well, that's so fascinating. I'm not sure how much it has to do with poetry, but I'm really glad I asked because I got to learn a lot
I
about
have a
it.
poem in one of my books about palm reading, but not in
Yeah,
this one.
that's really intriguing. And you mentioned too, though, psychic reading in general, it being a part of a bigger psychic reading. And a lot of times, there's a way that like poetry is sort of like that divination by spontaneously generating stuff and then adding whatever we're adding to it to interpret it and like build it up and to grow it into something. It's like if we have a
Hmm.
prompt and we have like, red, ocean, and cat, and then you put a poem together based on that, like something wholly new and based on understanding and based on some kind of connection that you didn't know comes from that. So is that
Yeah.
the aspect? Is that the thing that connects it all together? That projection of consciousness, I guess, onto the materials you have to work with.
Yeah, and trusting something. I mean, when was a psychic reader, I had to trust myself. You know, if somebody's sitting there, and I used to do it in the Catskill resorts, and there'd be a line, people, and I would just have to, if something came, I would just have to trust it. And I think that's very much a part of when I talk about following a poem as it's being created, is kind of when the red, and I forget what the other things were that you had there, but you put a red river or something like that, somehow trusting what shows up. And it almost always, I think, if you get into that state and that's not your left brain, it's not your logical brain, it's not trying to do something that's practical in a way, it's doing something totally else, impractical, and you're allowing that to find its way. It will almost always surprise because the writer themselves, I think, because it's something you never put together before. It's something that never, and to me, that's what a metaphor is. It's like putting things together that never felt like they had any place together, and they suddenly have such a perfect place together. You're thrilled by it. I mean, when I read a great metaphor, that's how I feel.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a great way to put it for sure. Well, if anybody has any questions for Prartho, just leave them in the chat windows either on Facebook or YouTube, and I will pass them along. There's already one, before I even asked, by Penelope Moffat that's interesting about your name. And I think the next poem might tie into that a little bit too. So it's a good segue to read the Charlie Chaplin poem as well. And I'll finish out the question if you don't answer it all on your own.
So we'll do Charlie Chaplin first?
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay. Charlie Chaplin and me. Legend has it that Charlie Chaplin placed third in a Charlie Chaplin look-alike contest. Now that I've been threatened suit for stealing a stranger's pic for my publicity photo, I know how he feels. When we met with an arbiter, it got that far. She pointed to the leg in the photo and said, "Look at the bulge of that calf. That's not your calf. Look at the flounce of those side curls," she said. "That's not the way your hair goes. It's mine." I'm embarrassed to admit how unsettling it was. I found myself defensive, coming up with details about the day my daughter snapped it on a walk by the lake under the old madrone. "No," she said, with a certainty I couldn't match. "This was taken at the bus stop on College Ave. See the shadow of oak leaves on my face?" I took a good look at my challenger and had to admit she was better at me than me. Floppier hat, rimmed with profusions of bright blooms. Periwinkle blouse rhymed perfectly to her eyes. And those widening pupils that tunneled down like black holes artists render at the centers of galaxies. I had to hold fast to my chair, to keep from sliding in.
Yeah, that was Charlie Chaplin and Me. That's actually the poem from the fall issue of Rattle. And I just love that ending, like sort of that turn out of nowhere to falling in, falling into the black holes of her eyes. That's just great. Again, from Starfall in the Temple. And, a poem about identity. And I didn't think to ask this or even wonder about it, but Penelope, where does it go? I'm trying to find the actual question, but that jumped on me. Hang on a second. Where is it? Penelope Moffat. Yeah, here he is. She says, I'm curious about her name. Is it a name that she took for herself? Does it have a meaning? So is there...
I was given it in India. Excuse me. Some people say sometimes, is it your given name? And I say, yes, actually it is. In 1980, so I've had it more than half my life now. And it means, Prartho is kind of a diminutive for prayer. And, but I was told it's a prayer of gratitude. So I often tell people it means the opposite of kvetch. So it reminds me to stop kvetching and to be grateful. So it's a good reminder. And it's very hard to speak. And if I order a bagel and they're going to have to call your name out, I always know it's my turn because they go, So anyway, but no, it means something to me to keep reminding myself that to be grateful.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I didn't think to ask that. That's a great question. Thanks for passing that along, Penelope. And I should say too, if you're enjoying this conversation, make sure you click the like button. It's always, if I say that, there's more people clicks and then more people watch it later, and it's always good. So do click the like button if you haven't yet on YouTube or Facebook or anywhere else. Let's see, I want to make sure we do enough poems. So let's jump right into the next poem too.
Okay. So that's How to Befriend Uncertainty.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So this is a COVID poem, probably obvious. But, sorry. Should I?
Oh, you're fine.
So this was written to instructions that I was going to give my 6th grade students. I was a poet in the schools, and I taught many levels, but this was 6th grade, and it was during COVID, and we were teaching on Zoom, and so and the kids were all alone and isolated. And I thought, I'm just going to give them an example of a good instruction poem. I mean, I don't know good, but an instruction poem. And so I followed all the instructions I gave them for their instruction poem. So, and it was for myself. And I told them that's what we needed to do, each of us. How to befriend uncertainty. Come, sit in the seat by the window, near the birds who have shaken off their dreams and opened themselves to this never to be again day. Today, we won't be asked to bumble along the beaten byways, for uncertainty is our house guest. Put on the water, set out the homemade jam. Uncertainty will listen with us as our bagels pop from the toaster's dark mouth, and the coffee grounds weep their bittersweet sobs. Uncertainty is mystery's love child, no history, no proper name, but she has always been with us. She is the one who wakes us to drizzle new questions into our day, new stories, new colors and light. The wind is her breath. Her body is the water we bathe in and drink. Uncertainty, with her barefoot dancing gypsy soul, knows the unpaved roads to gratitude by heart. But of certain things, like tomorrow, she knows nothing. And because of this, her love knows no bounds.
And that was How to Befriend Uncertainty. A really great how-to poem from Starfall in the Temple by Prartho Sereno. And I'm glad you mentioned the poets in the schools, because I wanted to bring that up. It's a perfect timing, too, if anybody's watching this right now, because the deadline for the next Rattle Young Poets Anthology is 2 days away. So if you're happen to be listening and if you know any young poets and haven't sent their poems in, you still have about 48 hours from the live broadcast anyway. So don't hesitate to do it. It's really fun to do. It's one of the highlights of the year for us, because we get to see these voices and how much surprising and how much depth there is to the things young people say. We always bring up this quote, but Sharon Olds in our interview said that there's not a bad poet in the first grade. And I've done poets in the schools a little bit too, and I found that, it's just amazing what comes out of young people just when you teach them a little bit about how to generate stuff and be free. They just grasp on and love it. So what has your experience been like, and what did you learn about poetry by teaching children through Poets in the Schools for so long?
Well, what you were just saying, one of the things was first and second graders, I used to call them my mystics, because they don't know cliche, really. It takes a while to learn cliche. And so if you ask a second grader, I'm remembering, what's the softest thing in the world? They're not going to say a bunny or cotton or something. They'll say the floppy part at the bottom of your ear, something like that. Mm-hmm. And it's just so fresh and so true. I never knew how soft the bottom of my ear was until he said that. But so, there's something about just the, again, I guess it's, I would always say to them, trust yourself. But I think I was teaching myself as much as them because they were teaching me about that trust.
Yeah, and it feels to me like, as adult writers, we're trying to get back to that space that they write from where everything seems new again because we haven't, imposed our will and our models of how we think things should be onto the world. Do you think that space is easier for you to get to because of all the meditative kind of practice that you have? It seems like you've been cultivating that sense of wonder for your whole life, probably. Do you find that sort of the root of your poetry is that childlike space of wonder?
Yeah, that's interesting. I had a little painting business for a while. I was painting on, I don't even know what, clothing, I think, at that time. And it was called Return to Wonder. And, that was a long time ago, so decades ago. So I think that's always been my, I knew that wonder was probably the most valuable experience that we have. And it's so much fun to share it. It's also good for everybody around you. It's not just good for you. And so it's always been something I wanted to cultivate. And luckily, I got this job as a poet in the schools. I was invited. I didn't even try for it. Somebody just called me, came out of the sky. Karen Benke, she'd read my essay book actually and said, "Do you write poetry? Would you like to do this?" And so, I've had a very lucky, and meditation is part of it. I think just another way to continue the wonder, to continue to be in that state.
Yeah.
One time, let me just say this. One time I was using the word wonder in first grade, and I started to think, do they know what I'm talking about? I think they know, I wonder, but wonder, I was talking about. And so I said, what does that mean? And this girl raised her hand really high, and she said, well, it's when you get a question inside you, and it gets so deep, and you can't answer it. And then she said, and maybe nobody can. And I thought, yeah, that's it.
Well, that is wonderful. That's great. I love that. And there's so many things that they just spontaneously say and come up with. We have some poets in those anthologies where it's just, a 3 or 4 year old or, can't even write, of course, at that age. And the parent just following them, or they come up to the parent and say, oh, I want to write a poem. I'm going to say it. And then they record it and write the thing down. And it's just these amazing things that come out of their mouths sometimes. Do you have any advice for anybody who is interested in maybe teaching in schools? Because I think that's something we don't think about or mention enough. California Poets in the Schools is sort of a program that helps set people up and teach them how to approach schools. And they have information packets and stuff. But really, if you just call up an elementary school and say, I'm a poet, I would love to teach, volunteer to teach, or, moving that into being able to teach in the schools is something that anybody could really do and would be so much appreciated and so valuable. Do you have any advice? If somebody is entering a program like that, of going into a classroom, what works best and how would you go about teaching kids in a way that, what did you learn in that process of doing it for so long?
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. I definitely want to underscore what you just said. I think anybody who wants to go into a school, and especially at the beginning, maybe volunteer, I remember at the beginning I would have, because Poets in the Schools is a great organization, and they had things like grants, little mini grants, so you could go in and do things and get paid. but the school didn't have to pay, and you just had to kind of convince them by coming in. So what would I mean, I wrote a whole book about this actually, which I haven't finished or published, but it's close. That's what I did. One of the things I did during COVID. It's called Tending the Roots in a STEM-Crazed World. And so what can I say about how to do it? I mean, the main thing I would say, one of the main things, there'd be a lot of main, but would be to get the kids to write poems with you. I would bring in poems that were samples, but a lot of times I'd have the kids create the sample. So I would start, for example, today we're going to imagine that colors can be people. I'd say, like, just tell me which color drives a sports car. And then they all raise their hand, and immediately they get the joke, they get the idea, and then which color, keeps a secret the best, which color, plays basketball and can, like that. So we do this whole thing. And then we write a poem together about gray, and I'll say, oh, look, gray just showed up at the door, and I'll say, gray's going to come in. And I usually do gray partly because most kids don't have that as their favorite color. So we can really do gray big. How does he move? And then we talk about verbs, and we write a poem together, and then they take off because they can pick another color and turn it into a human being and have fun.
Well, that's great advice, and I think it definitely too. Poets and Writers has grants too, where they match for community involvement. There's a whole bunch of opportunities if it. So that's why I wanted to mention it, just because. Mm-hmm. It's something people might not have thought of, but there's opportunities to do it, and it's a lot of fun and really rewarding. I mean, I remember, going into a school and having no idea what I'm doing, and then all the kids in like 7th grade, where they're usually miserable, just loved when you showed up, and you're just, we're just doing poems today, and they're like excited to see you, this like dorky, poet coming in. So it works
exactly.
Great. So anyway, let's read another poem. Let's go. Next up, we had. In the Counting House.
Yeah, the ghazal. So this is the ghazal, which is a form, and I tried to stay very close to it. It was interesting. This is my first successful ghazal, and so every stanza ends with the word count. So we're in the counting house. That's part of the rules. There's a few other rules. I'm supposed to address myself, which I do at the end. So in the counting house. Before they did the assignment, they always asked if it was going to count. And if it counted, they wanted to know how much it would count. I cleaned for a millionaire who owned 2 mansions, one with a 30-foot waterfall, one in a lakeside stand of pines. But she always made me count out $2 in coins before she gave me the $50 bill. She held her breath and her empty outstretched hand as I counted. They tell me once it was tulip bulbs. Before that, shells and beads and hand-carved figurines is what we count. Who was happier, the king in his counting house or his queen with bread and honey, a sweetness he could count on? Some days it amounts to almost nothing, my little stash of this and that, but who's counting? Yes, worry's cheap at the window, Prartho, but turn and see how rich the birds at their feet are. Seeds flying like flung stars, too many to count.
That was In the Counting House, a ghazal by Prartho Sereno from Starfall and the Temple, her beautiful new book. And that mentioned the house cleaning. And one of the things I wanted to ask is, which of all the so many fascinating jobs you've done, which one sort of is the most memorable and you have the most nostalgia for? Like, which one did you appreciate most? I was thinking about, for me, it was the group home where I was a counselor for adults with schizophrenia. And, so when we, have them and just talk and hear their stories were so fascinating and varied. And then also there was this time after they went to bed where I could write poems. So it was a perfect job but like that, what is the job that you found the most rewarding or the most interesting, or just you have the most nostalgia for?
I think it was Poet in the Schools, actually. I mean, it was the one I kept the longest. I was, flitting around a lot, as you've heard, but that one, I think of it often, how it kept something young in me that I still have, and I owe everything to those kids actually.
Did you
So,
focus on a certain grade level, or roughly, or was it
well,
elementary,
when I
or yeah?
first came in, there were a lot of poets in Marin County where I live. It's a very, there was a big program and a lot of poets. And so the only thing left was first and second grade. Nobody wanted them.
Hmm.
And so I always kept a lot of first and second grade. So I loved them actually. Even though they can't write that well, a lot of them, they can hardly hold a pencil, some of the kids in first grade. But, I would take dictation once in a while for them. Um, so I loved the really young kids, but I also really loved middle school. Because their brains are liquid. They're kind of, and they're willing to. I don't know. I had a lot of fun in middle school, but then I also really loved juvenile hall. I taught in juvenile hall, and what you were saying about the kids applauding, that would happen to me at juvenile hall. I would just be so touched. Like
Hmm.
I'd come in and they would stand up sometime and go poetry. They were just so happy, and I know it. Maybe I could take a tiny bit, but it was basically poetry itself that they were applauding, that
Hmm.
they could speak their own weird and wonderful selves. Yeah. So,
Yeah. Um, well, let's see. Look at the clock. Um, we have two poems left. Let's do Autumn Counts next.
okay, good. Autumn accounts. So you can see I'm accounting toward the end of the book. That we had the counting house. Now these are accounts. Autumn accounts. They say it's never too late. What with George H.W.'s skydive for his 90th and the 100-year-old water skier who bobbed and waved from my fridge till his photo yellowed and frayed. But it probably is too late to become a rocket scientist or oral surgeon, too late to free climb Half Dome or perform as the principal in Swan Lake. And it's surely too late to die young. Still, there may be time to enter the longing and give ourselves to what we become when we turn in its light. Pitcher of twilight, angel of glass, a grasshopper the size of a young boy's heart, a labyrinth of stones, like the one we discovered in the hills, that slow walk to nowhere, the very same nowhere we were getting to so fast.
Yeah, and that is Autumn Accounts, again from Starfall in the Temple by Prartho Sereno. And I wanted to ask about that, about looking back at such a varied and interesting life. And you've sort of settled on poetry in the latter half of it as the real focus of it. Why do you think that is, that it was poetry that sort of gives you the most or lets you stick with it? Or, what is the purpose of poetry to you? Why do this when, we don't sell thousands and thousands of copies of these books or anything? Why poetry and not other things that might reach more people?
Yeah, just saying yes, that's what comes. So, those are the opportunities that come, and that's what comes through me. And but it's interesting. I think of it as ballast, as you described it. Almost it, because it is interesting. I was a flitter. I went from thing to thing and place to place, and this became home. It easily became a place I could. Uh, some of my students have said too, who have been with me for years. My adult students have been with me, some of them for over a dozen years, and they'll say, "How long can we keep this up?" Because I don't repeat a class ever, a session ever, and it just feels like, yeah, I've had the same question. I don't think there's an end to it. There's no bottom. Um, so, yeah, I think that's why poetry somehow. And it's been amazing. I've been able to keep myself afloat teaching poetry, and mainly that's how I make my living.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's
So
great. And we've been talking about the broader questions, which are so interesting to me, that I realized thanks to Mark Grenier here, who asking a very typical, a standard poem question. We haven't really talked about poetry as a craft at all in the interview because there's so much else to talk about. But in that poem, if I can find it again, I think it was 72. Yeah. In the poem, he says the step down form at the end of Autumn Accounts. How did that come about? And one of the things, I just love the way your poems move and turn and end. So I wonder if you could talk more generally about how you come to an ending, because they all feel like this reflective, meditative thing, you can very easily see sort of the initiating impulse a lot of the times. Like this interesting thing I heard or saw or read that has my mind, I'm daydreaming and trying to understand it and make sense of it and what it all means. And then, moving through exploring in deeper and deeper detail. But how do you make it to the end? But in particular, in this autumn accounts, if you remember, you have the regular sort of stanzas, and then it steps down into this sort of slower pace, maybe shorter lines too. How did that come to be?
That's so interesting. Good question. I think it's a great question. And because really the voice of the poem is changing also in a way. It's very conversational in the beginning, so the form seems to want to be something a little more block looking, because it's conversational. They say it's never too late. They say, that kind of phrase. But it probably is too late. So I'm just kind of, and I notice that a lot of the poems, probably maybe forever, but especially lately, a lot of the poems have a conversational kind of voice to them, rhythm to them. But then I do still there may be time when I hit that moment, still there may be time to enter the longing. And somehow when I read that again, I like that, to enter the longing and give ourselves to what, because that's one of the things I've been thinking about also, is that I've given myself to poetry. I thought that even before all these questions today, and it has given back. I mean, and I think in a way, if you give yourself to anything in a total way, it will give a lot back. And so, and give ourselves to what we become. So now it becomes more meditative. Exactly. I went sort of it's a good point that he saw, I've left the block, a little more left brain world, and now I'm coming into a place that's different. And that's the point of the poem also. It's interesting. I'm not thinking exactly like this when I do it, but I'm feeling my way through. And I am, in terms of endings, I'm always listening for the ending in the same way that I'm listening to a poem. I'm looking for where it wants to take me. And, there's, of course, this wonderful satisfaction if it ends up in a place that feels like a good ending. I can kind of feel it, like there's a clunk or I've heard Boxlid saying. But then this other thing that happens, where the poems, the lines are kind of sliding. I mean, that's interesting. It looks now to me suddenly like a Mary Oliver poem. She had a lot of poems in this style, where she was indenting the stanza on the way down. And we've talked about this in my classes. What happens is does that indent mean more space, or does it mean you kind of go quicker to the next line because it's almost like a stair? And I'm not exactly sure. But to me, I feel like in this particular poem, it's each one of the images gets to be on its own, and we're going to take it down. I think that is it. We're going to sort of let these images take us into some other part of ourselves that's not the surface we started on. So
yeah, very interesting question. Thanks, Mark, for that. And just in general, I was thinking too, as we were reading poems, on our critiquing show that we do on Fridays, we always talk about the poem stays on one level and doesn't push deeper. And I think looking at your work, it's an example of pushing deeper and deeper and deeper. And it's hard to explain how to do that, but it's finding a way to dig farther down. So is there a way that you go about doing that? As you're writing the poem and composing it, are you looking for avenues to go down? How does it come to be that you're able to push the poems because the poems are sort of a page and a half, 2 pages sort of length, but they have a lot of movement in them through ideas and thoughts and stuff. So how do you keep yourself moving forward within a poem? Is that something you think about?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I'm thinking of something that I take Ellen Bass's workshop, sometimes living room, Ellen Bass in the living room. And I asked her a question once and she answered, and it was, well, because it's often said that a poem doesn't work or it does work, And I said, well, what does that mean when a poem doesn't work? And she gave a really cryptic, wonderful answer. And she said, I don't care about it. She said, a poem doesn't work if I don't care about it. And so I think there is something that, and that's a thing I talk about with my all level of students, is developing the muscle, and it's your heart muscle, I think, somehow, to feel where you're losing interest, where not even just you don't care anymore about it, and I will say, sometimes it comes in the rewrite process, but I write very messy. I don't have a copy here, but I'm rewriting the entire time I'm writing. So I have a really weird process. I can't do anything about it. It's just the way it is. I envy people that are just writing, I write and then oops, and then I'm up here and I'm down here and then, but I'm always kind of listening because what'll happen is I'll write something and I'll think, I don't care about that line. That's kind of is what it is. I don't like where this is going. It's not interesting to me. I know there's some place to go that is more interesting to me because it's stranger. I would say that's one of the qualities. It's unusual for me to go there. It's closer to something I've been carrying around but haven't been able to do anything, enter. And so, I could go closer to that. So, yeah. I don't know how helpful that is.
I think that really is helpful. And, there's that whole no surprise for the reader, no surprise for the writer mantra. But really, it's if you don't care about what you're writing, no one else is going to care either. And it's interesting you mentioned it being connected to the heart, like very physically, because I feel like when I'm reading submissions, all I'm doing is like letting things appear in front of me, like these sounds and, the speech coming in, through my eyes to my breath, though. And then I don't even have to pay attention, because somehow if I start to care, like I start to actually feel physically, like you start to like have the little goosebumps. Your heart starts to beat a different way. I mean, there's really like some connection that's beyond just your brain. And it's so fascinating that we've always talked about like love being in the heart, and that's the symbol for the heart. But it's so true that it works that way within a poem too. So is that what you're doing? You're like listening for your own like physiology, like an actual physical reaction to what you're writing.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. I love what you're saying, because I curate the class I teach and I bring in sample poems, and that's exactly what I'm doing. Just what you said. Like I can tell if a lot of times the first line I'll say, okay, I'm going into this poem, something happens in me, and it's definitely physical. Yeah.
Do you feel that over time, since you've been in poetry for a while, that with more and more MFA type poets, I don't know if you have poets that already have MFAs in your classes, it feels to me that the seeking that feeling is sort of diminished because there's so much craft, I think. Sort of hiding that feeling a little bit. Yeah.
I got an MFA when I was in my 60s. I went back to Syracuse University and I was in my mid 60s. All my fellow students were in their 30s. Yeah, or 20s. I think they were all, nobody was 30 yet, my fellow students. Anyway, so, but I did have trouble there in a way, because I felt like it was academia had snuck into, a place that academia shouldn't be part of it, and it did feel like it had something to do with, I don't know what it was. One of the things that I would say is there was kind of a suspicion of joy and love and things like that. Poems that went into the deep, dark spaces were often more acceptable.
Yeah, that's a fascinating aspect too. Laura B says duende, just one word, which is a great word for what exactly we're talking about too, that whatever it is. Is
duende is great, yeah, and that kind of darkness I'm totally for. Yes, in fact, I wrote my thesis. I had to write a little intellectual paper, and it was on duende and Ruth Stone's poems, and I just love Lorca's description of duende.
So we're coming up on time. If you mentioned your class many times, if people want to do that, does it roll continuously? Can people find that through your website and just join?
It does. You can find it through my website. Right now, I haven't updated it exactly, and we're in the middle of a series, so probably not now. But if you go to my website and even write to me and say, I'd like to be on your list, that will be a help, because I do send out emails. But also, you can register on the site generally when the class starts, and there'll be a new one starting. We're going to take a bit of a break, so it won't be till probably mid-January, mid to late January.
Well, great. I think listening to this, a lot of people might be really interested, because it's such an interesting conversation with you and such great poems too. So let's finish out with the last one on the list here, Practice Run, toward the end of the book.
Okay, great. So practice run. We get a few practice runs. One day, for instance, as your plane lifts off, Your life passes before you. The city below strewn with spent days, at once devastating and beautiful when spread out this way, the potholed landscape of catastrophe and grace. You'll feel like the bricklayer watching the weather take down the walls, the gardener at the fence after harvest, the conductor at the window of his emptied train. You'll see the good bits were small, but everywhere, fine threads worked into a coarse weave. You'll see what an immensity it's been to walk and breathe and feel things for which there are no words. You'll wonder how you missed the tenderness of the breezes in your leaves. You'll wish you'd done almost everything differently. But then again, would you really change a thing?
Yeah, great poem to end on too. Practice Run from Starfall in the Temple, the beautiful new book by Prartho Sereno, available from, is it Blue?
It's Blue Light Press.
Blue Light Press. That's. I thought it'd be on the back, but I couldn't see it. There, Blue Light Press at the very bottom. Okay, Blue Light Press. Yeah, beautiful work, and thanks so much for this really fascinating discussion, Prartho. It's been so much fun. Thanks for joining us.
I loved it. Thank you. And like I said, full circle, because I started with you.
Oh, that's just great to hear. Yeah. Thanks again. Wonderful. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was Prartho Sereno. Once again, you can find all of her books and more work and the classes too at prarthosereno.com. That's PRARTHOSERENO.com. prarthosereno.com. So go ahead and find this book. I really highly recommend it. And Indian Rope Trick too, I really loved. So do check those out. Now we're going to take a quick break and go to our open lines. And how that works are prompt lines. I should say we're rebranding, and I keep forgetting. These are prompt lines, only poems about the prompts. I need to change my little label on the screen here. But it is the prompt lines. So if you have a prompt, the prompt for this week was to write a sonnet with the title, "The End of Blank is Not Blank," after Jamaica's American sonnet, "The End of Sorrow is Not Happiness." So we should see a lot of sonnets, a lot of 14-liners at least. And if you have one, email it now to promptlines, all one word, at rattle.com. Then I can show the poems on screen as you read them. And then join the Zoom link, which I'm about to paste into the chat windows on Facebook and YouTube. I'll pin them to the top so you can see them. So join the Zoom link, and I'll be right back with more poetry. And we're back. Now, like I said, the prompt for this week was a very simple one. Write a sonnet with the title, "The End of the Blank is Not Blank," after Jamaica Baldwin's sonnet, "The End of Sorrow is Not Happiness." And as always, we have our prompt poem editor here, Katie Dozier. Hey, Katie, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you, of course. And so what was your experience writing this poem this week, "The End of Blank is Not Blank"? I know you like the American sonnet form. We argue about it all the time because I am always disappointed when the submission comes in and says it's a sonnet and then it's just an American sonnet, which has no rhyme or meter. But you consider it a container, like a sort of size and shape of a poem, which has a value, which I agree with. I concede that point. But anyway, what was your experience writing this one?
First, I would argue that my American sonnets still have rhymes, so I would point that out as my first.
That is true, and I guess on that, on one level, the internal rhyme. They're all over poems that, end rhyme, but that's true. You're right. Hang on one second. Make sure you're don't unmute yourself. Okay. Yeah, if you come in, make sure you stay muted. Anyway, so Katie.
So I started out, and I have one in progress that actually is a Shakespearean sonnet, but I also felt like I was writing too much towards the rhyme, and I fell out of my connection to the poem. So this is the one that I wrote that I felt the most connected to. I also tried to write one that was actually called "The End of Blank is Not Blank." But that I was too caught up in that being clever, and it went nowhere.
So how did you pick what this would be though? The title. I assume that came first.
Yeah, it did come first. I actually a previous one that I did, I think I had the title like "The End of Humanity is Not AI," and that's another one that I wrote with a little bit less success this week. So I went from that to "The End of the World," and I wanted to try to. I figured like putting a date or reference a time at the end was kind of interesting to try to twist it. So yeah, I feel like I could write a whole chapbook on this prompt though, actually. So I feel like though I'm also patting myself on the back by saying that. So
well, I've got it up on screen. And maybe you should write a whole new chapbook. Maybe you should write it in 30 days too. You could do that.
In 30 days. Why in 30 days when you can do it in 3 days? No.
Okay, so I have it on screen. Go ahead and read it.
All right. The end of the world is not today. Forgive me. I know as long as there are governments, there will be war. But today I turned off the news, stepped outside, and watched a brittle leaf paper airplane itself across the sky. It slid down the runway of a sidewalk, its landing gear a broken stem. I know how rainbows spring up, both in chalk and clinging to the dark thoughts of oil spills. I know leaves will be crunched by little feet that love to jump. Mulch will feed the daffodils, and how they'll grow, their yellow hats lining the pews we no longer seem to know.
And there's that rhyme at the end, of course, that we mentioned earlier. The end of the world is not today. And fortunately, a title that applies every day except for the last day. So
yeah, I was thinking, like, if I'm wrong, nobody's going to know. So it's okay.
That's true. Good point. Excellent point. But true, I really love that poem and love the political message, too. A rare political poem I like. So thanks for sharing that, Katie.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right. And now for mine, I did... I'm not really sure why, but I did. This poem is called, "The End of Loneliness is Not a Crowd," which somehow came to me, and I noticed that line happens to be iambic pentameter, like sort of the end of loneliness is not a crowd, and so I thought, well, what if I start out as the first line? And somehow it came to me that maybe I should try to write a monorhyme haiku or monorhyme sonnet, which I've never done, I don't think, before. I think I've done it with slant rhyme, but this is true rhyme. So I was on the plane flying back from Texas, had no access to a thesaurus. I wrote down all the words I could think of that rhymed with crowd, and there were exactly 14, which was perfect too. I could not think of any more. I came back and looked at a thesaurus, and there really aren't any more except for like fake ones and repetitions. So there actually are 14 words that rhyme with crowd, according to dictionary.com. And so this is: the end of loneliness is not a crowd. Is not 1,000 patrons talking loud inside a cafeteria, nor the cloud of smoke that hangs outside, a dirty shroud over the city, nor the field now plowed in the distance, nor the farmer feeling proud about his work. Is not a tree endowed with fruit, not hanging low, not many bowed. The end is not the cows so crudely cowed inside their pens like heavy furrows browed, as tightly packed as their beefy bulk allowed while they kicked and stomped and groaned aloud. The end of loneliness can't be kapowed like that. The judges aren't so simply wowed. That doesn't mean it should be disavowed. So that is my mono-rhymed sonnet. The end of loneliness is not a crowd. Let's see what everybody else has to share. We'll start out first. We'll just go in order. And Billy Melville, a first-time caller, is here. Hey, Billy, it's great to see first-time faces.
Well, it's good to be here. And actually, I'm pitch hitting here for my good friend Biswajit Mishra. He's asked if I could fill in for him because he's traveling today, so he wasn't able to read, if that's all right.
Well, that is wonderful. A pinch hitter. That's the first pinch hitter in in open lines or prompt lines, as I'm fixing it on the screen for everybody right now. Prompt lines history. So thanks so much for doing that. Do you usually write poems too? I assume you're reading his.
I'm reading his. No, I'm not what I would call I'm a songwriter, but not so much a poet. But I'm a fan of the Rattlecast and yourself and all the other people. I feel like I know a lot of them personally, even though I just kind of sit in the background and listen here.
Oh, that's so great. Well, I'm so glad he could join. Do you have the poem? Did you email it or did Bish wish
I do, yes. The end of winning is not loss. So
Okay,
that is the prompt poem.
Okay, let me just go. The end of winning. Let's see. Trying to find it. Mike, hang on one second. I'll see if it's on the other one because I did switch.
Okay.
To the prompt lines email address. Maybe. Okay. So he submitted it to me, so I have it right here.
Yes, he did.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have this version. So go ahead and read it as a pinch hitter. That's really neat.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll give it my best shot here. So the eagle and gull fly differently at different heights, each a beauty and each trying to make it their day of making it through without winning nor losing, just making it through to the next sunrise. They are neither a predator nor a prey. The weaver kept weaving and snapping the links in the rosary. Now you want to know about that weaver, but don't be a control freak. You already are that, and me too. Residue is not the outcome, but is that what is? As the end of appetite is not satiation, nor the end of hunger is fulfillment. And as the days unroll, you see the end of winning is not losing, as the end of losing is not winning. And losing is not. Losing is what you have, rather than losing is not losing what you don't have.
Well, who's on first? That's
yes.
a really fun poem by Bishwajit Mishra, read by his friend Billy Melville. Thanks so much for joining and sharing that. So fun.
Well,
yeah, so fun at the end. Thank
you. Thank you for having me and let me be part of it for Phys.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks.
Okay.
But it was Billy Melville pinch hitting for Bishwajit Mishra. And I should say, too, if you are on the X, formerly known as Twitter platform, Bishwajit's been posting some really great haiku, or actually, I guess, haiga with photos, too, lately. I'm really impressed with how good those are. So find him on Twitter. Bishwajit Mishra is pretty easy. I think if you type that in, that he's the one who'll come up. Let's go to Dick Westheimer next.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Dick. Good to see you.
Good to see you. I really resonated and sort of felt a little sheepish about that line in the end in your interview about caring, and how easy it is to fracture that with too much craft, to sort of like spoil the caring. You know, it's not that we shouldn't craft. It's just that sometimes you get in there and tinker with things, and you start caring more about that than the poem.
Yeah, it definitely happens. And we were talking to Jane Hirschfield about that too, when I was saying like it's easy to fake it. I remember, and she was like, "What? Why would you fake it?" And I was like, "Well, you can though. You know, you can like, you could not actually care, but use all the craft tools to make it seem like it's still a poem." And you know, my feeling about how well the poem works is how much it surprised myself and how unexpected, and how much of that deep space it found. And so it's interesting to think about. Caring is sort of the fundamental unit of that, I guess, which is a way I hadn't thought to put it.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And it struck me with especially the rhyming metric sonnet that I worked on today, which is at the top of the two that I sent you, is that as you sort of get to the end and you have this constraint and you're trying to find rhymes, all of a sudden you're caring about, can I make it fit, rather than, and it's a really complicated dance, at least.
But then focusing on making it fit is like the distraction sometimes you need in order to not make the poem go where you thought it was going to. So I think sometimes that's how a formal poet will tell you that that's the way that they can't write without that distraction. So it's interesting too.
Well, there's a short one here. I did a nonce for the second one, which I will defer. I think
since it's a short form today, we do have 21 people here in the audience, but it's a short form. I think we'll have time to do. If you have to write two this week, feel free to share both. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll do the first one, which is a rhyming metric sonnet that I still haven't figured out the meter of the last line, which is the wonderful thing about Katie's new group, is we can put poems up there that are in process. So this is called "The End of Us Is Not a Dream." I am suspicious of a man who claims he can't recall his dreams, who when awake about his day doesn't feel the inky breeze of what assailed him in his sleep, who doesn't know that he exists in a gauze-hung three-ring carnival of silent streets and empty crypts. The fact is, I am such a man who wakes not knowing what he's missed, who scoffs at those whose divinations sound like oil and water mixed. It's the bloody news and a drowse blurred kiss that missed in my waking on this listing ship.
That's great. Great use of the rhyme. The meter with sound and fun. I really like that. The end of us is not a dream. And I should mention, too, that when you mentioned a group, that is on Facebook. So if you want to find Rattlecast prompts on Facebook, you can find the group and join. And Katie and myself, although much more Katie, moderates that group. So, yeah, I hope everybody can join. Let's hear the other one, too. This is so this is a guzzle sonnet, sort of whatever you call it. What are you going to call it, Dick?
Well, it's a nonce, right? You know, it's sort of like a form where I tried to see, could I do a guzzle and still have the sort of the sonnet like ring at the end that happens, you know, with that shift. And I'm not sure, because, you know, there's this incoherence and spark between the couplets in a guzzle, and then you know, there should be some coherence in the last, say, 4 lines of a sonnet that give it some coherence. So I'm not sure if I did that successfully.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea to combine the two. Yeah.
Well, you're sort of challenging us to all sorts of forms here, Katie. You know, it's you know, with our Thursday guzzle and then write a sonnet. The end of pain is not love. The years before she died, my mother could not outrun pain. The therapist told her she'd need to learn to love pain. The nurses asked me to rate from 1 to 10 the range of my heart attack, bone-crushed 10-ton maul of pain. I knew at once all my farm work plans would change when the shovel handle caught my rib, now clutched with pain. Why did I wake palpating my bruise? Susan explained. We all seek evidence of life. We learn to trust pain. Before we wed, my bride and I fought about one constraint. Her parents were devotees to a death do us part cult of pain. When I first saw a loved one come undone with a hurricane of madness and rage, I felt I'd never rise above the pain. What made you think, Dick, you wouldn't have a turn? Stu explained. No one makes it through all his days without his share of pain.
Oh, that's excellent. I think great use of that you know, combination of the two forms. Really cool, Dick. Thanks for sharing that. And as Caitlin Bucksbaum mentioned, sort of I think she said there's a Venn diagram of that, the guzzle, the sonnet, and the duplex, all kind of related forms. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you all. Thanks. Bye.
Yeah, it was Dick Westheimer with the end of pain is not love, and the end of is not dream. Okay, let's go, since we mentioned to Caitlin, and she's 2 down, let's go to Caitlin next. Hey, Caitlin.
Hello. That was kind of a nice, like, oh, I need to pay attention now when you said my name.
Well, I figured, yes. I thought it was useful.
Well, and I was paying attention, but I have the video playing on my TV with the sound off so that I can like look at the poem and listen here because I'm cool like that. Anyway,
that's how the pros do it. And I should say too, that's a good reminder. If you're watching, you know, it's better to watch on the actual stream, the regular stream, because you can see the poems too. So if you're sitting here for a long time, you can watch a little bit on the YouTube and come back, or if you're done, you can go back to the YouTube. So you know, feel free to jump about. But or as Caitlin does, just do both at the same time. So what was your sonnet?
So I maybe kind of like Katie wrote a bunch of different like titles for it to try and see where I was going to go. I don't always start a poem with the title, but this time I did. And I came up with some good ones that I wanted to work on. I just kind of didn't get around to it. And my first MFA term is wrapping up this week. So I was kind of like, okay, I'm lucky to get one out. So this one is "The end of conflict is not resolution."
Okay, it's all ready.
Which is to say, a ceasefire is not all it takes to heal wounds, begin repair. Apologies may be long in coming, and blood takes time to cool, to be renewed. Given what we all know of compromise, we expect to be unhappy. Don't dare to look a greedy gift horse in the mouth. Let an enemy be the hand that feeds. Let's just say another bomb doesn't drop. Who will see silence as a place to take refuge from animosity, a chance on changing beliefs over peace of mind? Give up pride and blame. Honor the dead by saying, life is not mine for the taking.
Very interesting poem. Another political one. "The end of conflict is not resolution." So, Kate, what are you thinking about that MFA program? It's Antioch, right? Is it low residency?
It is low residency, which works for me because then I get to stay in Alaska for most of the year. But going down there in June was super fun, and I can't wait to go in December again. Would highly recommend that program to anybody on the West Coast looking into an MFA. But I'm actually jumping into screenwriting next term. So
don't tell poetry we're gonna lose you. I hope not.
It's funny because I've been getting that a lot. Like the poetry group in my cohort is very small. And so they're like, no, don't leave us. And I'm like, it'll be fine. I promise. You can work with the other cohorts. I'll probably be back. But anyway, but in other good news, I'm publishing my first author that's not me through Red Sweater Press in February, and pre-orders just opened for that. So if anybody wants to check out Oblivescence by Kelly R. Samuels, go to Red Sweater Press.
Perfect. Yeah, great pitch there too. And it's true. The reason why I went to the MPW, the Masters of Professional Writing at USC, is because they had all these different genres. You could do film, you could do all sorts of things, and they called it a professional writing degree instead of MFA. So I thought that was fascinating too. But anyway, looking forward to your screenplay at some point, and maybe you can start funding poems based on your your screenplay writing or something.
It's really interesting to find so many like poet screenwriters. I've already started, especially in the LA area, and I'm really interested to see how those overlap. So if anything else, I'll start writing movie poems or something. I don't know.
Yeah, well, very cool. Well, do check it out at redsweaterpress.com. Good talking to you, Kate.
Yep, you too.
Yep, that was Caitlin Bucksbaum with "The End of Conflict is Not Resolution." And next up is Douglas Silver.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Douglas, good to see you again. Thanks for coming back.
Good to see you. All the poets, great to see you. Yeah, I couldn't be here last week, so Tuesday morning I watched it on YouTube, last week's interview with Jamaica Baldwin, and I really enjoyed it. And saw the prompt, fill in a couple of blanks with that title, and listened to her themes and tones, and I just sat right down and wrote this. It's called "The End of Ignorance is Not Wisdom."
Very cool. Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay. The end of ignorance is not wisdom, after Jamaica Baldwin. Looking back at what we thought we knew, and I'm sorry, let me start again, sorry. Looking back at what we knew and thought we knew, who we were and thought we were, before the appearance of this intruder, this thief. How did they get in? When did they get here? What would they have taken had we not found them? Early detection, we were complimented, is one of the keys to success. But how did they get a key? How long had they planned to stay? Where would they go next? Stretching out and taking what they could. There will be scars, we were warned, inside and out. But the main thing is what you've done, and the next is what you're doing now and going to do forever. All precautions and preventions possible to keep them from returning. Changing the locks, double checking the windows, leaving the light on. Now that ignorance, or is it innocence, is gone, replaced not with wisdom, only the constant reminder of what is so precious, of what is too brief. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Great channeling of the tones too of Jamaica Baldwin's, and great wisdom in that statement too. Thanks for sharing that, Doug.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, it was Doug Silver with "The End of Ignorance is Not Wisdom." Next up is Paul Mitchell Bernstein.
Hey, Tim. Hey, everyone.
Hey, Paul. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Yeah, so I'm glad you said we could share two because I wrote two. I'd love to share them both. I think at the top is "The End of This Thing Is Not My Thing," which is a nonce inspired by Dick Westheimer.
Mm-hmm.
It's a combination of a Shakespearean sonnet and a guzzle, and I think I followed all the rules except for the iambic pentameter.
Oh, very cool. I'm trying to find though. Let's see.
Do you not see the email?
Yeah, I'm not seeing the poem here. Let's see. Maybe let me check the. Did you submit it or did you email it?
I emailed it in the text. I could redo it. You could come
let's
back
see.
to me.
Yeah, why don't you? That's weird. I wonder if
I actually emailed it about 15 minutes before the podcast started. So
let's see.
Maybe.
Yeah, I just didn't get it. So email again to promptlines@rattle.com.
Yeah, let me try again.
Okay. Let's see. And that'll take a second. So let's swing back to you after we talk to Nancy Tanow instead.
Hey.
Hey,
well,
Nancy.
I did the Hi there. I did the Shakespearean form. I love the challenge of this. And it allowed me to explore one of my favorite topics, which is people who live in the past and should not be doing that. So the title of this is "The End of Then Is Not Now."
Got it right here. Yeah, excellent. Let's go. Let's hear it.
Nostalgia works its magic once again, and from the past the images appear, reminding me of life as it was then, when hopeful dreams eradicated fear. At times it is not healthy to look back and cling to blurred remembrance of events we see as rose the char and smudge of black. We push away all hints of discontent. The past entices, lures us from today. It offers thoughts that we must disallow. Nostalgia, when excessive, brings decay. The end of what was then cannot be now. The songs of spring in silence rest. Their echoes are our winter's guest.
I love that closing couplet, especially. The songs of spring in silence rest. Their echoes are our winter's guest. Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing that, Nancy.
All right. You're welcome.
And let's go back to Paul Mitchell Bernstein. And Paul, I have to apologize. I had both the old one and the new one open, and I closed the new one, and I thought I closed the old one. So I do have your sonnet here, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, we do. So, and you have the two you sent, which is perfect as well.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay, so yeah, you want to read the top one first? And how did you go about? Like my trouble with this prompt, it was hard to figure out like what to fill in those blanks. Did something just pop into your head, or I don't know? That seemed actually the most challenging part. And then once you did it, for me, the poem kind of wrote itself.
Yeah, I don't know. The one I wrote first is sort of a fun one, and it's the combination of the Shakespearean sonnet and the guzzle. And I can't really say how it came to me, but it was, yeah, I don't know. I honestly don't remember. It's funny, we're talking about, I have this thing when I write, I work on a poem for a while, and then I do, like, once it's finished, I do lose interest in it in a way. Like I move, like I kind of forget.
Yeah, me too. That's for sure.
I think it's just because I write a lot and I move on to new things, and I sort of can't keep it in my head for too long. But yeah, the end of this thing is not my thing was the first one. And then the end of faith is not pride. It was based on a conversation. And I think maybe I was listening to some Leonard Cohen at the time, but I don't know. But, the way I struggled, Dick mentioned when he posted what he was going to do, the combination, the challenge was, how do you do both and then indicate the turn, like he was saying, those last, the last ones. And so I tried to do it in a few ways. One by, I put the guzzle refrain in parentheses and I moved them from right to left. And then I indicated the turn. They start to move the other direction. So I tried to indicate the turn visually, as well as in the poem, just as many ways as I could. Yeah, but I don't want to ramble too long.
Well, sounds good. Let's hear it. The end of this thing is not my thing. We're really interested in hearing this.
The end of this thing is not my thing. I was born with this thing between my legs. This thing. They called it boy. They cut it and sucked it. Yeah, that thing. School was strange, serious, no dicking around. A teacher took my friend to the closet, touched his thing. On a trip to the zoo when I was 6, a girl I didn't know pointed to a monkey, said, "That's his thing." First girl I ever kissed when I was 8, Kate, she kissed me, then slapped me and kicked me in my thing. A heavy thing, sex and death. There is nothing less cliche, even in a highway rest stop toilet. Yeah, that thing. My ding-a-ling, a big hit, blackberries, slap it on the turntable, don't scratch it. One last thing, things swing. You can be anything. My thing? Yeah, you can just call it PMB, your thing.
That was great. I'm surprised turning those ghazals into sonnets worked really well, and that was a really good use of it. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. So the next one is pretty straight. It's a pretty straight Shakespearean sonnet. And it's about loss of faith. It's called "The End of Faith is Not Pride," and it starts with a quote from Leonard Cohen: "A million candles burning for the love that never came." We've done our best to keep our word in hand, to write it down with every passing hour. Poets as we strike out across the land, to cage the rain, the love, the pain, the flower. You leave us to their hearts of violent lust. I give to you to see us in our cast, to do with us the things you feel are just. Be swift with us, the only grace of you I ask. Sorry, that's an old version kind of creeping into a new version. Be swift, the only grace of you I ask. But tired the weight it lay on our shoulders, and burn the winds it whip across our face. As dark gets darker and cold gets colder, we warm ourselves with all things in their place. But look, where is the help you said you'd send? Why should we ever trust in you again?
That's excellent too. "The End of Faith is Not After Pride" by Paul Mitchell Bernstein, and also the end of this thing is not my thing by Paul. Thanks so much for sharing those, Paul.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, and really, I mean, this is why I love formal poems and sonnets. That's why I'm excited when we get sonnets as submissions, because they sound so great to my ear. Let's see, Stephen Allen is a sonneteer. Not that rhymes. Hey, Stephen, how you doing?
Hi there.
Yeah, good to see you. And I know you're going to have a good sonnet because I know you write a lot of sonnets.
Yep, and this time I've written a sonnet about sonnets.
Ah, the meta sonnet.
Getting meta-poetic here.
Excellent.
You have it up?
Yeah, I've got it up. Go ahead.
Okay. The end of the sonnet is not the closing couplet. You'd think the snap of the rhyme would be firmly final, a closure like sutures stitching up a cut, a neat little stop, something appealing to primal desires for doors that slam completely shut. A way to say, so there it is, the end. A finitude because infinity scares, a package tightly wrapped, ready to send out to the reader, as if the reader cares. There's always another poem. A single ending doesn't matter much in the grander scheme, but still the terminal words, by mending or rending the scrim of thought, can plant the seeds of a dream that leaves the dreamer wide awake and burning, haunted in the early hours of morning.
Oh, that's great. I love that too. Thanks for sharing that. That was Stephen Allen. And Stephen, what is it about? Because I know you write a lot of sonnets. So what is it about the sonnet in particular that draws you to it?
In some ways, that's just how the inspiration comes. I more often than not will come up with a first line that's in iambic pentameter, and It seems a very natural way to go from that. I also write a lot of blank verse. Don't submit much of it because I tend to ramble on and rather pointlessly.
So maybe the answer is it keeps you from rambling.
Yep. Yeah, in a way it does. It provides a way to provide control.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Well, thanks for sharing that one. Another excellent example and good lesson too in how to write a successful one. Thanks for sharing that, Stephen.
Thank you.
Yep. That was The End of the Sonnet is Not the Closing Couplet by Stephen Allen. Let's go to Nate Jacob next.
Good evening.
Hey, Nate. Good to see you.
Hey, as a true American, I went ahead and abandoned all rules.
Well, there you go. Even the 14 lines. I
kept the 14 lines.
This is a 32-line American sonnet.
I did, in fact, write a 28-line double sonnet, but I did not submit it to you. It seemed a bit much. Okay. However, I do have a double title.
A double title, too. Just breaking all the rules. Can't even stick to one.
I couldn't handle it.
All right.
So you do have it, right?
I sent it to you. Yep, go ahead.
The end of innocence is not in your memories, or the end of Manhattan is not as close as you think. Commit this all to memory. The smell of the Waldorf closet, the way shaky Tad at the desk kept touching your forearm, and the fear you had being in New York City for the first time, when air became tarmac, became taxi, became sidewalk. Remember the sound of the curtain rising on Broadway, how the entire theater fell silent in that expensive darkness. The hippie placed an apple fritter in your innocent palm, a tiny maraca in your lap, and you waited to see others, eating and shaking before you ate and shook. Remember, emerging from that dank side exit alley like a newborn, certain you could smell your own scalp, so in love with the world, you even tried the halal food cart on the corner of 6th and 50th. You always share the things you don't like. Remember me having your kebab, not your Coke? I remember the Coke.
Oh, that's great. I love the title too. The end of Manhattan is not as close as you think. It's such a great, so accurate, having tried to walk from one end to the other. It's a long way.
We mistakenly did it late at night once, our first time there. And that's where
well, very interesting memory and great, great American sonnet, I have to say. Thanks for sharing that, Nate.
Thank you.
Yep. There's Nate Jacob with The End of Innocence is Not Your Memories, or The End of Manhattan is Not as Close as You Think. Next, let's go to Andrew Trudidnik, because I think Andrew, if I remember right, is from pretty far away, but maybe I'm thinking of someone else. Hey, Andrew, how you doing?
Hi, Tim.
Are you calling from Australia, or am I thinking
Australia? Yep.
Australia's the place. It's like, what time is it where you are?
Well, it's actually it's nearly 2 p.m.
Oh, okay. So I was thinking it was like, I guess I got the times. I thought I was thinking it was like 4 a.m. or something. But
no. Well, it used to be, but 10 to 2 it is. 10. So yeah, it's the daylight saving, thing that we do and you do, and they somehow overlap and mesh.
Who knows? Well, it's great to see you again. It's been a while, and I think you've got a sonnet, or actually two for us.
Yeah, well, it's kind of it's a sonnet and a reversed version of the sonnet, like read from bottom to top. In the I got the idea.
What do you call that? Is it
I don't know, but Dorian Locks
poem or something? Yeah.
Dorian Locks was the person who pointed it out as a good way of testing for whether your lines are discrete or not.
Oh, interesting.
And
that's a good point.
And I don't know what you call it, but it somehow it almost works. The first one works better, I think the reverse. So the first one is just straight, and the other one's reversed. And yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. This is built around the headline from a Hungarian online newspaper. The end of the world is not yet timely, it said. The end of the world is not yet timely, said the headline, translated from Hungarian. It went on to say, no model suggests that we will destroy ourselves recently, which had me a little worried. Recently? We're still here, or did I miss something? This was from 2022, and I've heard that AI has improved quite a bit since. Today it translates from the same article. The end of the world hasn't come yet, and no model suggests we're going to destroy ourselves anytime soon. Well, that's a relief. We're all still here, alive, for a while yet anyway, says AI.
That's great. Did you want to read the mirror?
And the mirror version is almost works. The end of the world is not yet timely. For a while yet anyway, says AI. Well, that's a relief. We're all still here, alive, to destroy ourselves anytime soon. And no model suggests the end of the world hasn't come yet. Today it translates from the same article that AI has improved quite a bit since. This was from 2022, and I've heard we're still here. Or did I miss something? Which had me a little worried. Recently? That we will destroy ourselves recently? It went on to say, no model suggests, said the headline, translated from Hungarian, the end of the world is not yet timely.
Oh, that's great. That really does work in reverse. I like it.
So it ends up a bit surreal and weird. But it sort of works.
Yeah, that definitely does. That's very interesting. Thanks for sharing that.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks everyone.
And thanks for the idea about that exercise too. I hadn't heard that Dorian suggested that. I have to try.
Yeah, it was the thing she suggested, that if you read a poem that way, she talks about it testing for whether the lines you've written originally are discrete, and it's sort of, if it hangs together. She just sort of calls it a party trick almost, and tried it with a few things I saw her doing once. Anyway,
yeah, definitely
it's
good thing to try. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, take care.
Thank you.
Yeah, there was Andrew Chudinnik with The End of the World is Not Yet Timely. Very similar to Katie's sonnet. Okay, let's go to Carolyn Codd next.
Hello.
Hi, Carolyn. Great to see you today.
I didn't know about the change to the prompt thing. So I have a poem that I think I shared some time ago. But it's kind of like a more of a poet response to war. That's War Cry. And then I have a tiny little mini poem that I just wrote that's much more peaceful.
Okay. Well, I think we'll let it slide for this time. So no problem at all. But we are switching and we're focusing just on the prompts because we get so many good ones. That, I like the pace of it. But let's hear it. Let's hear it though.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is War Cry, and this was inspired by my viewing the Picasso's Guernica about the bombing of a town in Spain during the Civil War by the Germans. War Cry. Today again I saw the Guernica. Last time New York in the 60s, now here in Madrid. And still they agonize and scream. We protest and shout. They're mutilated, they cry, they die. We protest, we shout. Make love, not war. Stop the war. Learn from the past. Never again. Peace we want, paz we plead, shalom we pray. And they do talk peace, and some make peace. The peace is signed, and some do keep the peace, but the peace is in pieces. And in between, more war. Let there be peace, we pray. Peace on earth, we say. But about peace, what do we know? What we know about is war, all sorts of wars. Tribal wars, revolutionary wars, gang wars, civil wars, world wars, contained wars, play wars, practice wars. Kids watch war in their living rooms, play war in the streets and online. Then they're taught more about war, studying the names, the dates, and the places. Sometimes they even analyze the causes. About war, we gain more and more knowledge. Some ones become specialists in war, making and trading the newest weapons. Others study in a military college, preparing to do the latest in wars. Clean wars, dirty wars, high-tech push-button wars, fast wars, star wars, drone wars. But about peace, who has the knowledge? Could we teach peace instead of war? Or is peace too boring? Peace, path, shalom, we say. But about peace we know very little. And still they agonize and scream. We protest and pray. They're mutilated. They cry. They die. Excuse me. And again we plead, no more war, stop the war. And yet about war we learn more and more. But the most important part we've never learned. We don't know how. Will we ever know how to stop it?
Yeah, really important message. Thanks for sharing that, Karen. I love the repetitions of the war. You know, the way the sound moves through the poem is great. And then really quickly, you had the haiku-ish poem. Do you want to read that really quick?
Yeah, I like to keep track of the moon. So one night recently, after looking at the moon, I wrote this. Reflection. The moon is a great reflector. I send a kiss to the moon. It reaches you.
Oh, that's a sweet little poem. Yeah, reflection. Thanks so much for sharing that, Carolyn.
Thanks.
Yeah, it was two by Carolyn Codd. And yeah, we have moved the show to all prompt lines. This is now the prompt lines, but a good retrospective for how things used to be. Let's go do Mike Bales next. Hey, Mike.
Boy, the poet tonight is really good. I'm going to have to listen to her poems again. It's hard to take it all in one setting.
Yeah, she definitely is. I really enjoyed getting to talk to her and hearing her poems.
That's one of the deepest things you could do, talk about meaning or talk about who we really are. It's like a lifelong thing. I emailed one to you, but both are unsubmittable. I've got 2 sonnets.
Uh-huh. Okay, so what do you want to read?
The End of Summer is Not the End. It's a combination guzzle and sonnet kind of poem.
Everybody had that idea. That's really great to see it happening.
In the first poem I heard in this sonnet workshop was that kind of thing, and I wrote actually kind of a sonnet for that workshop in 14 lines, but it's all guzzle things, 2 lines, 2 lines, 2 lines, that kind of thing. This is the end of summer is not the end.
Okay.
A crimson leaf falls in the morning as the sun shines in the morning. A melody breaks through silence, and I awaken in the morning. Day emerges from a veil of clouds as night gives way to morning. A time of rest leads to a time to begin, and I rush out of the house in the morning. Although the calendar says November, the touch of a warm breeze brings the morning, a time to celebrate another day as it starts with the morning. A time of reflection lives in my poet heart as the sun shines in the morning.
Excellent. Yeah, great. I really the ghazal turned into a sonnet is a fascinating thing to do. Thanks for sharing that, Mike. And do you want to read the other one too?
I do.
Okay.
Again, it has to do with me being retired as a flagger, stop slow sign guy. The end of the highway is not the end of the road. Leaves turn color, flutter and winds turn colder, but in sunlight the leaves glitter gold. The side street where I reside, and bearing its age, is broken. I'm retired now and pondering how my life could change and did with a phone call to pack and go on assignments anywhere in Wisconsin or anywhere where the hotel was my home. My life was lived out 1 week at a time, but here in town I now stay and write poems and stories to recite where lines rise, fall on angel wings.
We love those flagger stories, Mike. Those are always great. Thanks for sharing both those.
I suppose I'll be like the other guy, write for flagger stuff for the rest of my life.
Well, it's great, though. It's really interesting memories you got of it. Thanks for sharing, Mike.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, take care. It was Mike Bales with 2 sonnets. Rob Harris is next in line. Hey, Rob.
Hey, Tim. How are you?
I'm great. Good to see you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Before I read this, I have to say that the prompt, I was aware of it, but it wasn't really speaking to me until a few hours ago. I read a story about a fatal crash on a highway that I've driven 100 times.
It's too bad.
And I could picture the spot where it happened because I've driven it so often. And in that moment, a light switch came on, and I had to say something about it. So that's the poem the sonnet that I'm offering tonight.
That's great. Yeah.
It's called The End of Life. The end of life is not knowable. That's the first line of the sonnet.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, great. The end of life is not knowable. So we should live and love on this planet wherever we are and whoever we're with. It won't last forever since it never has before. All of the best summers are fleeting, and even the most spectacular autumns must eventually give way to winter, and then one day it will be spring again. If we could know what time and place our earthly voyage will reach its conclusion, some might want to make plans and prepare, but they miss out on so much in the process. Let's all continue going forward through life and enjoy it for as long as we can.
Yeah, great message, and a really important one too. We have to enjoy this life that we've got. We only have so many breaths, however many that is, and nobody knows the number.
If I could just say one thing, there was one fatality. That person woke up today thinking it was going to be any other Monday. They got behind the wheel of the car. They headed out southbound on Interstate 55 in Illinois, and the highway at this moment is still shut down. I don't know if the next of kin or whoever needs to know has been notified or not yet, but that's how fresh this is, and that's how quickly everything in life can just end. So I mean, I saw that and I said somebody needs to say something about that, and so I guess it was me. So thank you for
sharing. I misunderstood you for a second, thinking you said they woke up, in the hospital, were alive, but that's too bad. Yeah.
Just this morning. That's how fresh this is, and that's how crazy life is sometimes.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that, Rob.
Thank you. Yep. I appreciate it.
Take care. So Rob Harris with The End of Life is Not Knowable. Next is Zachary Honeycutt.
Hey, Tim. How's it going, man?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing great. So I managed to squeeze out a Shakespearean sonnet today, but I say squeeze out because I did not have as much time to write as I usually do, and I kind of cranked it today, but it came out good, so I'm happy with it.
Those are the best kinds, the ones that come pretty quickly.
Yeah. And this is called The End of Play is Not Work, a working man's sonnet.
Interesting. Okay.
I played in dirt all day today, digging big holes with a small ego. Grade men dumping concrete, a motley array of minds and hands bumping elbows, toes stepped on and bent with no recompense, nor trace of relent, pouring cement slow down holes amidst autumn's winter's pleasance. What a presence! Hauntingly grand gifts, no warm cold like churches with snow on their roofs, but bitter blows of wind can't rescind work like play. When we talk, every talk, caulk all grooves in between boards of homes we fenced with a smirk. But then I stop. What makes it all worthwhile? At night, I'll see your beautiful smile.
Oh, that is great. Thanks for sharing that. And of course, always the rhymes are just wonderful in your sonnets, Zach, and in all your poems. Great internal rhymes too, as well as the end, and landed on some love as well. Very interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Zach.
Sweet poem after all my dark.
I know. I was trying to think if I've ever heard a sweet one before from you. So now there's at least a first time for everything. I'm sure there are more though. Thanks for sharing that, Zach.
Yeah. See you guys next week. Bye-bye.
Zachary Honeycutt with The End of Play is Not Work, a working man's sonnet. Sonnet 25, too, we should note. Next, let's go to Monica Dobos.
All right. Hello, everyone.
Hey, Monica. Good to see you.
Same here. I have to say I'm sorry about my voice because I have a cold. As my son says, if you have something important to say it before 6 o'clock before mom starts coughing.
That's a good idea.
I hope that's not going to happen.
Well, I'm getting over mine. I had one for the critique of the week, and I'm like totally fine, except for the voice is still, a little bit, maybe here. But I feel great. But hopefully you feel great again soon.
And I'm so happy I was able to write another prompt poem.
Yeah, me too.
Considering I'm not very good at prompts. It's probably not a sonnet, but it goes anyway.
Okay.
The end of dill pickles, as found at Sprouts 2 rows down to your left, is not the beginning of Beats, an American preteen sonnet. Nothing beats dill pickles, says my son, opening the fridge door and picking up from the floor the Thich Nhat Hanh Find Peace and Joy Now magnet, which luckily for him doesn't break, as that would aggravate me because I got it from Deer Park on the very day Ty visited the monastery and gave a beautiful speech on letting go in 3 steps. The first step, awareness, realizing there are no dill pickles in the fridge, followed by not slamming the door, which displays multiple fragile peace magnets. Step 2, insight, explaining to my son that the refrigerator is not an infinite source of pickles. Otherwise, we would prostrate to a cold, metal-tasting God and resurrect cucumbers. The third and final step, acceptance, creating a new, equally healthy habit of eating condiments. I suggest pickled beets, rich in iron, 0.70 milligrams, sodium, 270 milligrams, and sugar, 91 grams per 32-ounce jar, which we open long before the dill pickle one, and we don't waste. Step 4, keeping your sense of humor when he reminds you for the 100th time that beets don't go with toasted cheese sandwich, which escapes me. And why don't I finish the beets once and for all, since they're round and red and sweet and smell like Earth is having her period? And what's wrong with girls anyway? At which I grab a peace magnet and hold to it tight, like a kiss.
Oh, that was wonderful. And I think you out-Americaned Nate Jacobs with that prose poem sonnet. That is really neat from Monica. Monica Moo or Monica Dobo? What should I say? Because both names come up a lot.
Well, Dobos actually is my maiden name. My dad was Hungarian, and Dobos is also like an amazing chocolate cake if you ever want to look that up. So Monica Moo, because I have an obsession with cows. That's like my poet's nickname.
Okay, so the poem is by Monica Moo.
The poem is by Monica.
Talking to Monica Dobosh. Thanks so much for joining us, Monica. That was really fun. I love the details and the humor and the fun of that. Thanks for sharing it.
Thank you.
Yep, that was Monica Moo with the end of dill pickles as found at Sprouts. 2 rows down to your left is not the beginning of beets, an American preteen sonnet. That's a great title as well. Next, let's go to Mary Keating. Hi, Mary.
Hi. Nice to be here again.
Yeah, great to have you again.
Yeah. So I wrote an American sonnet, tried to keep in iambic pentameter, but not.
Oh, I think your mic may be muted. You muted on Zoom, so there you go.
Sorry.
Okay,
sorry.
no problem. So you try to keep
I
it
don't
in
know what you
iambic
heard, but
iambic pentameter, you were saying.
Right. So it's called The End of Sickness is Not Dead.
All right.
Symptoms assuaged again after battles, but still danger lurks in X-ray shadows. Permanent uniform, cut, torn, and sewn, parts missing, malfunctioning, overgrown. And though I can no longer stand, I rise above the hours that stretch my spirit beyond what would rip most people apart, as I beg the heavens for sleep's relief. Like the waters of Lethe, to forget, my body bound to a hospital bed with antibiotics and prednisone dripping elixirs into open threads. Soon more scars will adorn me like badges, reminders. My body's worn, but still not dead.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I love that. And again, another example, I just love sonnets as a form. It makes everything come to life. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was Mary Keating with The End of Sickness is Not Dead. Let's see. Susan Talley is next up.
Hello.
Hi, Susan. Good to see you.
Amazing how these poems are getting so great.
They really are. I mean, everything. I love the prompt lines. It's really fun to just sort of share in a journey too. I really like. I like doing it this way.
I want to compliment Katie because I'm Ms. Dozer, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think this prompt is fantastic. It's really hard, and a sonnet is very difficult, but I have to share this. When I was writing in the library and I worked on it, I was like going, because I'm new really to this, pages and pages of sentences, and then I'd rearrange them, then I'd make sure I go to the next page. So I had pages and pages, and I kept trying to keep them in order. And I imagine myself as a poet actually way back, like in Shakespeare's time.
Oh,
I
that's
just,
great.
kind of felt like it for the first time. The sonnet is what does it, I think.
Yeah, I think it does. Okay. So I don't have the full text of it.
Well, I don't have the full text of it either.
Okay. Well,
It's kind of the cerebral, what I'm thinking. That's what I want to share because it's no way a sonnet yet.
okay. Well, that's great. Yeah, sonnet in progress, I guess you could say. Thanks for sharing that. Go ahead. I'll put it right here so everyone can see. Go ahead.
It did have a title, the end of sorrow is not the end of joy. I was very inspired by the poem, and I want to make a reference to another poem called Too Much Joy. And the poet last week and the poet who wrote Too Much Joy had the same philosophy that when you're rubbing up against something emotionally, it's easier to write that than to write the joyful experience. And in the poet that we heard last week, I felt it was very feminine when it started to go, this poem that she wrote.
Yeah.
Because she went into something that I don't think men experience. It's just a feeling that girls and women have. It's a very specific part of it.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm looking on my phone for it. This is the cerebral. Sorrow and joy, that coin runs down the drain. The soil is a landing to see one thing. Loss is not a game. To be substance in turn, heads and tails are what we rub against.
Oh, that's definitely very interesting. I love those lines. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. Yeah, very cool.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, definitely. That was Susan Talley with the beginning of a poem, The End of Sorrow is Not Joy, and looking forward to seeing the whole thing because that is really, really some wonderful lines there. I love the idea of the soil landing makes us see one thing. Yeah, that's really cool. All right, and next let's go to Brian O'Sullivan. Hey, Brian.
Hey, so I'm in the Guzzle group.
The more Guzzle group.
Kind of
so we should say,
sophisticated and
we had,
intricate as some of the other ones. It's just 14 lines in a Guzzle.
Well, I think people might not know that we did, Katie and I do the Poetry Space, and we did a Poetry Space on Guzzles, had some great contributions from Rattle contributors, Shannon Mann and Karan Kapoor. Brian O'Sullivan was there, Joe Barker was there, as other people as well, and talked a lot about the Guzzle. So I think that's the inspiration for all these Guzzle sonnets, combining the two shows that we've done last week. Very interesting. So it's basically like 7 couplets of the Guzzle becomes a sonnet, and it's interesting to think of it that way. And a lot of people had this really interesting idea.
And I was particularly interested in what Shannon Mann was saying about, as I heard it, how irreverent a Guzzle can be, how playful it can be, also how chant-like it is. And I probably took that too far, but it's an experiment.
Okay, let's hear it, yeah.
So, it's called The End of Childhood is Not Maturity.
Yeah, great title.
Thanks. Here. Stick the end of this hose in your muzzle and guzzle up. The cold ones will pour down the funnel. Guzzle. My throat constricts, then opens. Cunningham, grinning, slops golden bud into the dark, winding tunnel. Guzzle. The night is cold and the beer is colder. All around, all the young and thirsty crew were chanting, Guzzle, guzzle. Our clunkers squat in St. Greg's parking lot. There is Chuck's pride, his 69 gold Impala, a bad gas guzzler. Guzzle! Shep, our stub-tailed hound friend, runs out to headbutt our buddy Denise, who smiles but keeps chanting as Shep nuzzles. Guzzle! I still can smell and taste that metallic mix of beer and fear in sharp air and in my freezing throat when I guzzled. Thinking back, I almost need a drink, for I face a hard puzzle. Guzzle, guzzle. Have I got the brain cells left to write a guzzle?
That is great. I really love that, Brian. That's a lot of fun. And that is the thing. If anybody wants to listen, it's the Poetry Space. Just type that into, Spotify or iTunes or whatever, Amazon Music, it'll show up. And that's the thing. I learned a lot too. I learned a lot in the Poetry Space generally. And I didn't realize how much fun was part of the Guzzle form too. It's a lot more, we think of it as like the Middle Eastern sonnet kind of, but the truth is it's more like the old ballads from playing and entertaining and having fun in the court. And that's how they work. And there's actually a lot of contemporary songs are in the Guzzle form. It's a really common way to write, just like the ballad. So it's much more balladish and more ballad playful too. It's really interesting to learn about. So yeah, everybody should check that out. And I really love the playfulness there. That was a lot of fun, Brian. Yep, take care. It was Brian O'Sullivan with a great title too, The End of Childhood is Not Maturity. And all right, next in line, we have Lisa Seidenberg.
Hi.
Hey,
How's
Lisa.
it going?
Yeah, good to see you.
I'm here. I'm not a big fan of prompts, but this was a good one.
Oh, good. Well, we're glad we caught you with one.
I I was inspired to write, and then I went back and looked, and I thought, oh no, it's a sonnet. Oh no. So I had to edit, but that's good. It's good. So I'm ready.
Did you send it to me somewhere? Where'd you send it?
I think so.
Okay. Let's see.
Do you not have it?
I'll pull it up. Let's see. There's just the problem is there's a bunch of places to see it. Okay. So there. Yeah, I don't. Maybe the spam.
Leeside3
that one went to my spam. Oh, and Mary. Okay. Here we go. It just went to spam. Look safe. You were totally a trusted ally now.
Oh,
okay. So Lisa, here we go. The end of a dream is not waking. So now, great title there too.
Okay. The end of a dream is not waking. Certainly her arms ached after 53 hours swimming with stinging pink jellyfish from Havana to Key West. Diana Nyad had tried before, tried and failed 4 times. The 5th time, her battered body lurches onto the Florida shore. Or frostbitten, Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay climbed the South Col of Everest in 53. Hillary snaps a photo of Tenzing with his Kodak cased in ice as he steps onto the windy summit, but Hillary refuses his own picture taken. He was on top of the world, and that's all that mattered. Some dreams are not for peaceful slumber, but for eyes open to a distant wonder.
Oh, I love the last couplet and all the slant rhymes throughout. Thanks so much for sharing that. That's great, Lisa.
Thank you. I was afraid the rhyme was when I heard your poem had a lot of rhymes, and I thought, oh, okay, I'm going to go with this.
Well, it sounds great. I really liked it. Thanks for sharing.
Rhymes are tricky. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So Lisa Seidenberg with The End of a Dream is Not Waking. And there we go. Okay. I got to make sure that Mary Keating is also not spam. So there we go. Okay. Next, let's go to who do we have last? Mark Grenier is here. Hey, Mark.
Hi, Tim. How's it going?
Yeah, good. Great to see you.
Okay, I tried to fill out the prompt. I'm not sure about the meter, but the title's got the way it was.
Well, if you listen with an ear for poetry, which you have, I'm sure it works out great.
The end of war is not peace. In Israel, a father mourns his daughter captured by Hamas. The little girl, kidnapped, not killed, as he was told by the state in October, is imprisoned now under buildings collapsed by his nation's bombs. He imagined her fear facing the malice of captors armed and hateful in tunnels under Gaza as bombs fall near. He regrets her survival, imagines a dreadful fate worse than death in her home, the cost of decades of war, dictated by victors trying to right another era's wrongs, the Holocaust, brought by Aryan masters against Jews crying now for vengeance against Palestine's children, recreating again their pain, deaths, desolation.
Excellent. Yeah, great way to put in, as you can see, the current events with the prompt and combine the two. You can submit them to both places. Excellent. Yeah, thanks, Mark, for sharing that. A really timely and important poem, too.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Yep, take care. This is Mark Grenier again. When the end of war is not peace. Let's see. Mary Lisa Denominatius is next. Just a couple people left.
There I am.
Yeah,
Hi.
there you are. Hey, Mary Lisa, great seeing you.
Hi, you too. Great fun. Really enjoyed your guzzle talk on Twitter, X, whatever they're calling
Whatever
it.
I don't know.
Yeah, whatever they're doing over there. But I do go over on Thursdays to listen, so they're always fun. Always a lot of fun. I am pulling it up. So this is a Syrian sonnet, but I kind of played around with it. It's got dangling lines, I call them. So instead of 14 lines, it's got 15 to 18 lines.
Okay, well, looking forward to hearing it. And looking at the forum too, which I haven't really heard of. Maybe one you've invented.
Oh yeah, no. Okay, yeah. Well, the Syrian sonnet is 3 quatrains: A B A B, B C B C, and C D C D. And then the couplet is EE. And then, so it's 14 lines, usually iambic pentameter, but I'm sure my meter, forget about meter. It's just not going to happen for me. And then it has to have a turn in thought or direction. And the stanzas are end stopped. So I don't think mine are end stopped.
No.
No, I have a hard time constraining myself with sonnets.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing it. Yeah, and
all right,
adding an extra line to each is really interesting too. So let's with dangling lines. Let's hear it.
It's always too much. Okay, the end of the song is not the end of the story. In part because it felt so strange to kiss it, I kissed the tall wooden cross. In part to test myself. How humble could I be? To propitiate, submit, admit a need for a God in the midst of a congregation? I have to kiss the cross, I asked and grumbled. At the foot of the altar of my neighborhood church, I grumbled under my breath to my husband about it. I mumbled that I'd never done it, but I would do it. I was afraid of not belonging and of belonging, afraid I would crumble under the mighty invisible fist of a God I daily prayed existed, but doubted, considering how many others prayed and received no answer. These kisses, were they meant to persuade God to pay us more attention, special consideration? Were they given to prove our love, our devotion? Were our kisses made to prod a preoccupied God to love us back? Were our kisses driven by want of protection, by want or need? I have been driven to kiss wooden trees without prod, and for want of no gain. I have kissed the air for simply being, and the terrain. Without elaborate display, I kiss rain, and risen I sing.
Oh, I love that form. That is so good. I love the way that you added to that and included the rhymes all the way throughout. That's a really neat form. I like it.
Oh, that means so much to me. Thank you so much. I had a lot of fun with it. Katie, these prompts rock. They rock.
Oh,
Thank you.
That's great. Well, thanks so much, Mary Lisa. And it's a good example too of, you're writing about certain things. You have themes that you've met in your writing, but adding the prompt to that is a way to open it up and explore new territory within that. So yeah,
I'm so grateful for that. Thank you.
Well, very cool. Thanks so much, Mary Lisa.
Okay.
Yeah, there's Mary Lisa Denominatius with the end of the song is not the end of the story. Okay, next we have Laura Berg, who might be the last. Let me double check. Yeah, hey, Laura. I think Laura's the last on the Zoom. Hey, Laura.
Hello. Well, I have 14 lines.
Well, that's all it counts as an American sonnet. Even if they're like 8 pages long each line, it still counts as an American sonnet because that's how we roll in this country. So
I got kind of preoccupied with what the end is, and then I wrote away. Okay. So the end doesn't have to end.
Interesting. Okay, let's hear it.
Ad that hentios, the earliest root of end, meant forehead, the body's outer limit. Otter that endon in Greek meant within the home. The word next alights upon the Latin fin, boundary, land's edge, not unlike the body's edge, though our minds and words boundless can cast far. Even our gaze as we age softens edges, makes a luminous haze closer to atoms in their wild motion, emotions, the air, a swirl of gases open and unbound. Suspect anything you hit hard against. Rub pastels, smudge lines with pleasure, melt the end as it is only an illusion.
Oh, that is great. Thanks so much for sharing that, Laura. And I feel like we're going to have a sonnet every week as the prompt, because I love hearing sonnets so much. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yep, take care. That was Laura Berg with The End Doesn't Have to End. Great title, too. All right, so that is it for the Zoom. Let me check. I think I saw, let's see. Yeah, I want to read Ted Guevara's, too, because Ted isn't able to join the Zoom, but he's here very often. And he also always sends a photo. And this is, let me describe it for those just listening later. It is a man desperately praying in front of his broken car with a hood up, in front of a beautiful field as well. So a nice scene there that Ted shared. And here is his, I assume, sonnet, Idolatry. Let me, I have to shrink the, oh, it'll fit. Okay, so Idolatry. The end of road assistance is not neglect. Foul mouth is not included, but it's in the truck, locked shut like an expensive jack, sensitive to rain. You are stranded a stretch of sundown long. You agreed to a soulful hour. Your mind folding in, out like a sock. Aura behind the driver when he strolls up. Very interesting. That is Idolatry by Ted Bernal Guevara about the poor man praying to his broken car. Thanks for sharing that as always. That's going to wrap up the prompt lines. It's been such a blast to share all these sonnets with great title inspiration and then really wonderful work all around. I really love this. Might be my favorite prompt lines yet. Well, it's the second prompt lines. It might be my favorite open lines yet. Let's swing it back to our prompt poems editor, Katie Dozier. Hey, Katie, you still there?
Hi, we convinced you American sonnets are amazing, didn't we? Way to go, team!
Well, I do like the container. It's a good length for a poem.
It is. It forces you to get somewhere fast, or else you're not going to have any lines left to write in.
Yeah, that's true. It really does. And it gets the turn in there. It makes you have to move, which is really important, as we all know. So for next week's prompt, what have you got for us?
I do not have a document open in front of me. You're going to have to tell us what I have.
Well, I will tell you what you have, and that is right here. Write a how-to poem about something you don't know how to do. So a bit open-ended, a lot of room to play with that one. Write a how-to poem about something you don't know how to do. That'll be next week's prompt. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
I'm really excited to write this, and even though we only came up with this prompt today, the ideas are already starting to come to me. I think that, if we say that there's discovery in a poem, well, there's no more discovery than not knowing how to do something, but telling people how to do, which is what a lot of people do all the time. So.
Exactly. It really is. Fake it till you make it. So just how to do brain surgery, we could figure it out. All you need is the poem.
Yeah.
So I forgot to say too, and I'll put on screen just so you can see what the Poetry Space looks like. But the Poetry Space is Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern time. And this week we're going to have the second time an open mic. But an open mic in particular about thankful poems, a thankful open mic for Thanksgiving. That's going to be November 16th, the Thursday. If you want to find it at Katie Dozier, at Katie_Dozier on the X platform is where to join live if you'd like to share any poems about thankfulness or gratitude on the open lines. Why do you think it's important, Katie, to have gratitude in poems?
Well, I would say, first of all, that it makes you a better poet. I think that, during the interview, when you're talking about haiku and gratefulness and how important it is when you notice something on that level, I think that's when you can really write at your best. At least that's where my best poems come from, is from a place of thankfulness and gratitude ultimately.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's noticing what to appreciate, even in the darkness, the dark things to do. It's still gratitude. And perfect for this time of year. So your thankfulness poems, that'll be on Thursday's Poetry Space. Yeah, thanks, Katie.
Yeah, I just wish we were all going to have Thanksgiving together the next week. But
maybe some year we'll have a Thanksgiving.
Giant Thanksgiving.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, we'll talk to you soon, of course. Talk to you later.
All right.
Katie.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, it was Katie Dozier, our prompt poems editor. And let's really quickly close out with the Sciku. And the haiku, or Sciku, I should say, is based on this interesting article. I'll try to get the thing on the screen because you'll want to see this creature. This is a, what is it called again? It's a, I gotta scroll down for the name. Attenborough's long-beaked echidna. It's a super rare animal. It was once described in the wild 60 years ago, never before been caught on film in the Cyclops Mountains of Indonesia's Papua province. That's where it is. And so this is this team of scientists from Oxford University went out and really interacted with the tribe, spent a long time dealing with the people, befriending and helping, getting help from the people who live there in that Indonesian island. And they've cataloged all these different animals we'd never seen and never been documented by science, including tree shrimp. There's shrimp. It's so moist in these mountains that shrimp actually climbed up out of the ocean and started living on land in trees. So you can pick the shrimp off trees. I mean, that's just really interesting. So anyway, that was this research out of the University of Oxford, and that is a Attenborough's long-beaked echidna, which if you're just watching home, it's related to the duck-billed platypus too. It's one of only a few extant species of egg-laying mammals. And it looks like your ideal stuffed animal with a bird's beak. It's really strange and has sort of the spine of a hedgehog, lays eggs, has a bird's beak. Really strange, just kind of wanders around this mountain there. And so here is your Sciku inspired by that story. Billions of branches caught on the trail cam. Billions of branches caught on the trail cam. That is your Sciku for the week. That is the show for the week. Thanks everybody for joining me. It was really a great episode. I really loved every segment of it. So thanks for participating and making it part of your evening or later on afternoon, wherever you happen to be. Now, next week's guest in the Rattlecast is going to be Carrie Shipers. And Carrie's just a wonderful poet, has published a whole bunch of books in the last, I think she's got 6 books in the last 10 years. Her most recent is Griefland. We've published her a few times too, including the most recent issue of Rattle. She'll be the guest for Rattlecast number 220, Monday, November 20th, alongside the prompt lines with your how-to poems about things you don't know how to do. That'll be Monday, November 20th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you then. Hope you have a great week. In the meantime, I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.